5 armed men surrounded the stagecoach, their rifles gleaming in the dying sun. Inside, passengers whimpered. Driver Caleb Vance reached for his gun, ready to die like he'd lived. Alone, numb, empty. Then she stepped out. The schoolteacher, Eliza Hart. A woman who had no business holding a pistol, now aiming it straight at death itself. Her hand didn't shake. Her voice cut the desert silence like steel. "You'll have to go through me first." Thus, in that moment, everything Caleb thought he knew about survival, about himself, shattered. But this story doesn't start there. It starts weeks earlier, when a dead man first learned to feel again. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stick with me till the end. You won't regret it. The Colorado sun beat down on the rutted trail like a blacksmith's hammer, merciless and constant. Dust rose in choking clouds behind the stagecoach wheels, turning the world into shades of brown and copper. Up on the driver's bench, Caleb Vance held the reins with hands that no longer felt the leather's bite. 6 horses pulled the coach through the country that had buried better men than him, and he drove them with the easy competence of someone who'd stopped caring whether he lived or died years ago. 34 years old, and Caleb looked older. The frontier had a way of adding decades to a man's face while his birthdays stayed honest. His eyes, once a clear gray, had turned the color of ash. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, gift from a Comanche raid 3 years back. He wore it without pride or shame, just another mark on skin that had forgotten how to feel much of anything. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of say and distant rain. Caleb barely noticed. He'd driven this route, Denver to Cedar Ridge, 47 times, knew every rock, every canyon, every place where bandits liked to wait. The danger used to quicken his pulse. Now it was just routine. Another day. Another run. Another reason to keep moving so he didn't have to stop and remember. "Driver!" The station master's voice cut through his thoughts. "Got passengers loading. 5 this run." Caleb didn't look down. "Load 'em up, Harris." "One's a woman, traveling alone. Her funeral." "Caleb?" "I said load 'em up." His voice carried no heat, no emotion at all. That's what made Harris stop arguing. Anger you could work with. This emptiness? No one knew what to do with that. The coach creaked as passengers climbed aboard. Caleb listened to their shuffling, their nervous small talk, their useless prayers. He'd stopped learning names 2 years ago. Easier that way. When the Indians came, or the bandits, or the flash floods that turned dry arroyos into death traps. Easier not to know who you were failing to save. "All loaded," Harris called. Caleb snapped the reins. The horses surged forward, and Cedar Ridge Station fell behind in a cloud of dust. 3 days to Cedar Ridge town. 70 miles of the worst country the frontier had to offer. Apache territory. Bandit country. Land so harsh it killed the weak and hardened the strong into something barely human. Perfect. The morning passed in silence. Caleb guided the team with minimal effort, his body moving through motions it had performed 1,000 times. His mind went to that empty place it always found. Not quite thinking, not quite dreaming, just existing. The sun climbed higher, the coach rocked and swayed. Inside, passengers probably regretted their journey already. Around noon, the trail narrowed as it cut through a canyon. Red rock walls rose on either side, close enough that a man with a rifle could make every shot count. Caleb's hand drifted toward the Winchester at his side, not from fear but from habit. This stretch had seen 3 ambushes in the past year. Bodies still marked the places where coaches hadn't made it through. Nothing happened. They emerged from this canyon into open country, and Caleb felt something like disappointment. He'd almost wanted the fight. At least fighting was feeling something. The first stop came at Broken Creek, a sorry excuse for a way station that consisted of a lean-to, a water trough, and a man named Pete who'd gone half crazy from loneliness. Caleb pulled the team to a stop. 15 minutes, he announced, his first words to the passengers since departure. "Water your horses, stretch your legs. We don't wait for stragglers." He climbed down stiffly, his body protesting the hours of sitting, 34 and already moving like an old man. The thought didn't bother him. Nothing much did. The passengers emerged, blinking in the harsh light. Caleb paid them little attention as he checked the horses, running experienced hands over legs and hooves, looking for injuries that could cost them time or worse. Two men in business suits, a farmer and his wife, and Mr. Vance? The voice stopped him cold. Not the words, not the politeness, but something in the tone, steady, clear, absolutely devoid of fear. Caleb straightened slowly and turned. She stood about 5.5 feet tall, dressed in a practical gray traveling dress that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Fine-boned face with high cheekbones and a determined chin. But it was her eyes that caught him, dark brown, almost black, and sharp as obsidian. Eyes that looked at him without the usual reactions. No fear, no pity, no judgment, just clear, direct assessment. What? His response came out harsher than intended, or maybe exactly as intended. I wanted to ask about the route. I understand we'll be passing through Apache territory. We will. Should we be concerned? Caleb studied her. Most women would have sent their husbands or fathers to ask such questions. Most women wouldn't have asked at all, preferring ignorance to harsh truth. This one stood there waiting for an answer like she had every right to it. Yes, he said finally. You should be concerned. We're in their land. They don't take kindly to that. Have you encountered them before? 14 times. And you're still alive. I'm still alive. He turned back to the horses. Doesn't mean I expect to stay that way. I see. A pause. Thank you for your honesty. He heard her walk away, her boots crunching on gravel. Despite himself, despite the walls he'd built, Caleb found himself curious. Who was this woman traveling alone through country that scared seasoned men? Why wasn't she afraid? He shoved the curiosity down. Didn't matter. She was cargo. Cargo didn't require carrying. Mount up, he called. The afternoon proved hotter than the morning. The sun turned vicious, baking the landscape until heat shimmered up from the ground in waves. Inside the coach, the passengers would be suffering, sweat-soaked and miserable. Caleb sat exposed on the driver's bench and felt nothing. He'd learned long ago how to turn his mind off, how to become just another piece of the coach, wood and leather and iron, feeling nothing, wanting nothing. But something had shifted, some small crack in the armor. He found himself thinking about her eyes, about the steadiness in her voice, about the fact that she'd asked intelligent questions instead of dissolving into tears or vapors like so many female passengers before her. Stop it, he told himself. Don't start caring. Caring kills you. He knew that truth intimately. 5 years ago, he'd had a family, a wife named Sarah with hair like summer wheat, a daughter, Emma, 4 years old with her mother's laugh. They'd lived in a cabin outside Denver, simple but theirs. Caleb had worked as a freight hauler then, dangerous work but good money. He'd been building something, had dreams, had a future. Then came the night he'd stayed late in town, loading cargo for an early departure. When he'd ridden home at dawn, he'd seen the smoke first, then the flames. The cabin had burned to the foundation. Sarah and Emma had been inside. Accident, the marshal said. Lamp oil and bad luck. But Caleb knew different. He'd made enemies in his freight work, crossed men who didn't forgive. Someone had sent a message, and his family had burned for it. He'd buried them in the little cemetery outside Denver, stood there in the rain and felt something inside him die alongside them. Love, maybe. Hope, certainly. The part of him that could imagine tomorrow without dreading it. After that, he drifted. Took the stagecoach job because it kept him moving, kept him in danger, kept him from having to think. Other drivers lasted a year or two before the stress broke them. Caleb had lasted 5 years and showed no signs of breaking. Hard to break something already shattered. Driver! The shout snapped him back to the present. One of the businessmen had stuck his head out the window. What? Caleb called back. The lady passenger is feeling unwell. Heat sickness, possibly. Caleb's jaw tightened. Delays cost time. Time cost safety. But he couldn't leave a passenger to die of heat stroke either, much as part of him wanted to keep moving. He pulled the team to a stop in the shade of an outcropping. 5 minutes. The door opened and the passengers helped her out. The school teacher, he still didn't know her name, looked pale but steady. She accepted water from her canteen, drank slowly, and sat on a rock without fuss or complaint. Apologies, she said clearly. I'm not accustomed to this heat. Where are you from? The farmer's wife asked, all motherly concern. Boston. I'm Elizabeth Hart, though most call me Eliza. I've accepted a teaching position in Cedar Ridge. Boston! The woman clutched her chest. Lord have mercy, child, what brings a Boston girl out to this godless country? Eliza's expression didn't change. Opportunity, and perhaps the need for a fresh start. Something in those words resonated in Caleb's chest like a plucked string. A fresh start. As if such a thing existed. As if you could outrun your ghosts by changing geography. You feeling better? He asked, his voice rougher than necessary. She looked up at him, and again those dark eyes held his without flinching. Yes. Thank you for stopping. Wasn't charity. Dead passengers are bad for business. One corner of her mouth quirked up. Not quite a smile, but close. How pragmatic of you. Pragmatic keeps you breathing out here. Sentiment gets you killed. I'll remember that. They held each other's gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Caleb looked away first, disturbed by the intensity of her stare and by his own reaction to it. That crack in his armor widened just slightly. Mount up, he said. We're behind schedule. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident, but Caleb couldn't settle back into his usual numbness. His mind kept drifting to the woman, Eliza, and her calm acceptance of harsh truth. Most people flinched from reality. She walked toward it with her eyes open. By the time the sun started its descent, they'd covered 30 miles. Not bad for a first day, but not good either. Caleb pulled into Dead Horse Station just as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. The station keeper, a grizzled man named Tom Hickory, had a fire going and food ready. Caleb, Tom greeted him. Thought maybe the Apache finally got you. Not yet. Caleb climbed down, his body protesting again. Got 5 passengers. They'll need beds. Got beds. Got stew, too, if they ain't particular. The passengers filed out, grateful for solid ground. Caleb unhitched the team and led the horses to the corral, checking each one carefully. The work settled him, gave his hands something to do while his mind wandered where it shouldn't. He heard footsteps behind him. Somehow knew who it would be before turning. Eliza stood at the corral fence, watching him work. The dying light caught her face, softening the sharp angles into something almost gentle. You care for them well, she observed. They keep me alive. I keep them alive. Fair trade. Is that how you see everything? As transactions? Caleb focused on brushing down the near horse. That's how everything is. You give, you get. Nothing more complicated than that. I disagree. She rested her arms on the fence rail. Some things can't be reduced to simple exchange. Love, for instance, or sacrifice, or courage. Fairy tales. The word came out bitter. Real world doesn't work that way. The real world works exactly that way. I've seen it. Despite himself, Caleb looked at her. Yeah? What's a Boston school teacher know about the real world? Something flickered across her face, pain, quickly hidden. More than you might think, Mr. Vance. They stood in silence for a moment. The horses shuffled and snorted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. You should eat, Caleb said finally. Long day tomorrow. Will you join us? Inside, I mean. No. You have to eat. I'll eat out here. She studied him with those penetrating eyes. You don't like people much, do you? Don't like getting close to people, he corrected. There's a difference. Why? The question, so simple and direct, hit him like a punch. Why? As if she didn't already know. As if the answer wasn't written in every line on his face, every scar on his body, every wall he'd built around what was left of his heart. Because people die, he said quietly, and I'm tired of burying them. He walked away before she could respond, before those dark eyes could see too much. Behind him, he heard her soft footsteps retreating toward the station house. Caleb ate alone by the corral, Tom's watery stew barely registering his taste. The stars came out, hard and bright and indifferent. He'd always liked the stars. They didn't care, didn't feel, didn't mourn. They just burned, cold and distant and eternal. That's what he wanted to be. Cold and distant, untouchable. But that crack in his armor kept widening. Later, lying in his bedroll under the stars, he never slept inside if he could avoid it. Caleb stared up at the Milky Way and tried not to think about dark eyes and steady voices. Tried not to wonder what had brought a woman like that to the frontier. Tried not to care. Failed on all counts. Morning came gray and cold. Caleb woke before dawn, as always, and found Tom already stoking the fire. "Gonna be a scorcher today," Tom predicted. "Heat's building." "Always is." Caleb accepted coffee so strong it could strip paint. "Passengers up?" "The woman is. Saw her walking the perimeter an hour ago." Caleb frowned. "Alone?" "Yep. Got a pistol on her hip, too. Knew how to wear it, looked like." "Interesting. And concerning. What kind of schoolteacher carried a pistol and knew how to wear it properly?" He found her by the eastern fence, watching the sun break over the horizon. She'd changed into a darker dress, more practical for travel. And Tom was right. A small revolver hung at her hip in a worn holster. "Morning," he said, approaching quietly. She didn't startle, had probably heard him coming. "Good morning, Mr. Vance." "Caleb, Mr. Vance makes me sound respectable." That almost smile again. "Caleb, then. And I'm Eliza." "I know." He gestured to the pistol. "Unusual accessory for a schoolteacher. Unusual times call for unusual precautions." She met his gaze directly. "I'm not naive about the dangers, despite what you might think." "Didn't say you were." "You didn't have to. I saw it in your face yesterday when I asked about the Apache. You thought I was some foolish Eastern girl playing at frontier life." Caleb considered lying, decided against it. "Maybe I did. Was I wrong?" "I suppose that depends on whether we survive the journey." She turned back to the sunrise. "I'm a good shot, if it matters. My father taught me. He believed women should be able to defend themselves." "Smart man." He was. Past tense. Another piece of her story, carefully revealed. They stood in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher. Caleb found himself relaxing slightly, the usual tension in his shoulders easing. When was the last time he'd stood quietly with another person and felt peaceful? He couldn't remember. "We should get moving," he said, more reluctantly than he'd expected. "Want to make good time before the heat gets bad." "Of course." She started toward the station house, then paused. "Caleb, thank you." "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm made of glass. For being honest about the dangers. She hesitated. "For seeing me as capable." Before he could respond, she walked away, leaving him standing alone in the growing light, that crack in his armor, now a definite fissure. The second day proved harder than the first. The heat Tom predicted arrived with a vengeance, turning the air thick and oppressive. The horses struggled, the passengers complained, and Caleb's mood darkened with each mile. This was his life. Heat and dust and endless miles. Cargo that talked and complained and occasionally died despite his best efforts. No connections, no future. Just survival, day after miserable day. But now there was Eliza, and her presence in the coach below him made everything feel different, made him aware of things he'd successfully ignored for years. The weight of loneliness, the ache of isolation, the slow suffocation of living without purpose beyond just not dying. Around midday, trouble found them. The trail cut through a narrow pass between two ridges. Perfect ambush country. Caleb had his Winchester out before he consciously registered the danger, his body responding to instincts honed by 5 years of surviving impossible runs. "Everyone down!" he shouted. "Stay in the coach and get on the floor." They emerged from cover like ghosts, 4 riders, Apache, by their dress and bearing. They didn't attack immediately, just paced the coach on either side, close enough that Caleb could see the paint on their faces. His hands tightened on the reins, 4 against 1, bad odds. But maybe they just wanted to look. Maybe they'd let him pass. The leader rode closer, a warrior with graying hair and eyes like flint. He said something in Apache that Caleb didn't understand. Then, in broken English, "You pay. For crossing." Caleb's mind raced. He had maybe $20 in his pocket. The passengers probably had more, but taking from them would mark him as weak. Yet refusing might get everyone killed. The coach door opened. "No!" Caleb shouted, but it was too late. Eliza stepped out, moving carefully but without visible fear. She held her hands up, showing she was unarmed. The pistol remained on her hip, a careful distinction. The Apache warriors tensed, weapons rising. "Please," she said clearly. "We mean no disrespect to your lands. We're only passing through." The leader studied her with an expression Caleb couldn't read. Long silence stretched. Then the warrior said something to his companions. They laughed, not cruel, but genuinely amused. The leader looked at Eliza again. "Brave woman, stupid, but brave." He gestured at the coach. "Go. This time, no payment. Next time." He shrugged eloquently. Then they wheeled their horses and vanished back into the rocks as quickly as they'd appeared. Caleb sat frozen, his heart hammering. Eliza climbed back into the coach. The other passengers were white-faced with terror, but alive. "Drive on, Caleb," Eliza called up calmly, "before they change their minds." He drove, hands shaking slightly on the reins, mind racing with what had just happened. She'd stepped out of the coach, faced down Apache warriors with nothing but words and courage. Could have gotten everyone killed. Should have gotten everyone killed. Instead, she'd saved them. When they stopped at sunset, no-way station this time, just an open camp, Caleb waited until the other passengers had settled before approaching her. She sat slightly apart from the group, writing in a small journal by firelight. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen," he said without preamble. She looked up calmly. "Was it? You could have gotten everyone killed. But I didn't. You got lucky. Perhaps," she set down her pencil, "or perhaps I understood something you didn't. They weren't there to kill us, Caleb. They were there to make a point, to remind us whose land we're crossing. Showing fear would have been worse than showing respect. You don't know that, don't I?" Those dark eyes held his. "I spent 6 months in New Mexico before coming to Colorado. I worked in a town near Apache territory. I learned some of their language, their customs. I learned that they're people, not monsters. People respond to respect." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was naive, foolish, dangerously optimistic. But he couldn't because she'd been right. Her courage had saved them where his guns likely would have failed. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said finally, the words coming out almost gentle. "Maybe, but at least I'll die living, not just surviving." She went back to her journal, dismissing him. Caleb walked away. That fissure in his armor now a canyon he could fall through. That night, he couldn't sleep. Lay staring at stars and thinking about a woman who stepped out of coaches to face danger head-on, who saw people instead of threats, who lived instead of just survived. What was that like? He'd forgotten. 5 years of numbness, and he'd forgotten what it felt like to actually live. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. The third day would take them through the worst country yet, Badlands where nothing grew and water was scarce, where bandits hid in canyons and heat could kill as surely as bullets. Caleb checked the horses carefully, double-checked their water supplies, and climbed onto the driver's bench with the familiar weight of dread settling in his chest. One more day. Just one more day, and they'd reach Cedar Ridge. He could deposit his passengers, collect his pay, and maybe what? Forget about her? Pretend this journey hadn't changed something fundamental inside him. "Caleb?" He looked down. Eliza stood by the coach wheel, one hand shading her eyes against the rising sun. "Yeah? Be careful today. I have a feeling." "Feeling?" "That something's coming. I don't know what. Just be ready." He should have dismissed it, should have mocked her woman's intuition or Eastern superstition. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Always am," he said. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face from pretty to beautiful, and Caleb felt something in his chest twist painfully. "I know," she said softly. "That's what I like about you." Then she climbed into the coach, leaving him stunned and confused and feeling more alive than he had in 5 years. The morning passed in tense silence. The landscape grew increasingly desolate, all red rock and scattered cacti. Heat built like pressure in a boiler. Caleb drove with every sense alert, watching for any sign of trouble. It came at noon. They rounded a bend and found the trail blocked by fallen rocks, too neat to be natural, too carefully placed. Caleb's hand went to his Winchester, even as he hauled on the reins. "Ambush!" he shouted. "Everyone!" Men rose from concealment on both sides, 5 of them, rough-looking characters with weapons drawn. Bandits, the kind that plagued every frontier route. Caleb counted rifles, calculated odds, and came up with the same answer: impossible. The leader, a scarred man missing 2 fingers on his left hand, grinned up at him. "Afternoon, friend. Nice day for a robbery." Caleb said nothing. His mind raced through options. Fight and die? Surrender and probably die anyway? Try to bargain? The coach door opened. Not again. Not her. Not? Eliza stepped out. But this time she held her pistol, and it pointed steady and true at the bandit leader's chest. "No," she said clearly. "It's not." Every weapon swung toward her. Caleb's heart stopped. This was it. They'd kill her first, then him, then the passengers. He'd failed again. Failed to protect someone he what? Cared about? The admission hit him like a bullet. He cared about her. Somehow, in 3 days, this woman with her steady eyes and fearless heart had gotten past his defenses. And now she was going to die, and it would be Sarah and Emma all over again, and he couldn't— "Ma'am," the bandit leader said, sounding almost respectful, "that's a mighty small gun against 5 rifles." "True," Eliza agreed, "but I only need 1 shot, and at this range, I won't miss. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let us pass. We're going to pretend we never saw you, and everyone lives to see tomorrow. And if we don't, then you die first. And honestly," she tilted her head slightly, "I don't think you want to die today over a stagecoach that's probably carrying less than $100 total. Do you?" Silence. Long, stretching, impossible silence. Then the bandit leader laughed. Genuine, surprised laughter. "Lady, you got guts. I'll give you that." He looked at his companions. "What do you think, boys? Worth dying for pocket change?" The others shifted uncomfortably. Clearly not. "All right," the leader said. "You win. This time." He gestured, and his men lowered their weapons. "Clear the trail, boys." They moved the rocks aside. Eliza kept her pistol trained on the leader until the path was clear. Then slowly she lowered it. "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me. Just remember, next time you might not get lucky." It wasn't luck. She climbed back into the coach. It was knowing what you value more, life or money. I bet on life. Caleb sat frozen on the driver's bench, his entire worldview shattering and reforming. She'd done it again, faced impossible odds with nothing but courage and sharp thinking, and won. "Drive on," she called up calmly, "before they reconsider." He drove, hand steady now, mind whirling. Behind them, the bandits watched them go, probably wondering what the hell just happened. Caleb wondered the same thing. Miles passed. The passengers inside probably celebrated quietly. Caleb just drove, mechanically guiding the team while his thoughts spun in circles. She'd saved them. Again. With courage he'd thought was impossible, with a kind of fierce, brilliant bravery that made his own survival-focused existence seem hollow and small. And he'd realized in that terrible moment when he thought she'd die that he cared, actually cared. The walls he'd built, the armor he'd worn, the numbness he'd cultivated, all of it was crumbling, and he didn't know if he could stand what he'd find underneath. They made Cedar Ridge Station just before sunset, exhausted and shaken but alive. Caleb helped the passengers down, accepted their stammered thanks with his usual gruff dismissal, and started unhitching the team. "Caleb." He turned. Eliza stood there in the dying light, and she looked tired for the first time since he'd met her. Tired but unbowed. "That was foolish," he said. "Both times. You know that, right?" "Was it?" She stepped closer. "Or was it the only way to survive? You could have died. We all could have died. At least my way. We had a chance. Your way was insane. My way worked." She met his eyes. "And you know what I think, Caleb Vance? I think it terrified you. Not because I might have died, but because I reminded you what it's like to actually live, to fight for something, to care about something beyond just making it through another day." The words hit too close to truth. Caleb looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "I don't know what you think you saw in me," he said quietly. "But you're wrong. There's nothing left to care with, nothing left to fight for." "I don't believe that." Believe what you want. Doesn't change facts. He turned back to the horses, hoping she'd leave, hoping she'd push, not knowing what he wanted anymore. My father died when I was 16, she said softly. Cholera. My mother followed 6 months later. Grief, the doctor said. Though I think it was more like giving up. I could have done the same, could have let it destroy me. Instead, I chose to live, to honor them by living fully, even when it hurt. Caleb's hand stilled on the harness. I see that same choice in front of you, Eliza continued. You can keep running, keep dying inside a little more each day, or you can stop, feel the pain, and then choose to live anyway. It's terrifying, I know, but it's the only way forward. She walked away, leaving him standing in the dust with his broken defenses and his crumbling walls and a feeling in his chest that might have been hope or might have been terror or might have been both. That night, Caleb didn't sleep at all. Lay under stars that suddenly seemed less cold, less distant. Thought about a woman who faced down Apache and bandits with equal courage. Thought about what she'd said. About choosing to live, about how he'd been choosing death for 5 years without even realizing it. Dawn came, and with it a decision he didn't know he was capable of making. When the passengers emerged for the final leg to Cedar Ridge proper, just 8 miles now, Caleb was ready. Ready to finish this journey. And maybe, terrifyingly, ready to start figuring out what came after. He didn't know yet what that would look like. Didn't know if he could let himself care again, love again, live again. But for the first time in 5 years, he wanted to find out. And it was all because of a woman with dark eyes and a courage that made his own survival seem like cowardice. The final 8 miles passed in contemplative silence. Caleb drove carefully, aware of every turn, every landmark. This was familiar country now, almost safe. Just a few more hours and his passengers would be delivered, his duty fulfilled. Then what? Usually he'd head straight back to Denver, barely stopping in Cedar Ridge long enough to sign the manifest. Keep moving. Never stop. Never attach. But now, Cedar Ridge appeared on the horizon, a rough frontier town of maybe 300 souls, all hard people making hard lives in hard country. Caleb had never paid it much attention before. Just another stop. Another temporary place. He pulled the coach to a stop outside the assayer's office, which also served as the stage depot. Passengers poured out, grateful to have arrived alive. Caleb began the familiar routine of unhitching the team, checking them for injuries, preparing for the return trip. Caleb. He'd known she'd come, had been waiting for it, dreading it, hoping for it. Eliza stood with a small trunk at her feet, all her worldly possessions, probably. She looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and he saw understanding there. Saw that she knew exactly what was happening in his head, the war between fear and hope. Thank you, she said simply, for getting us here safely. Just doing my job. No, you did more than that. You kept us alive through country that's killed better prepared groups. You should be proud. Pride. What a foreign concept. Caleb couldn't remember the last time he'd felt proud of anything. Where's your teaching job? He asked, avoiding the real question hovering between them. The schoolhouse, I'm told, on the east end of town. She paused. I start Monday. 3 days away. 3 days she'd be here while he'd be on the trail back to Denver. 3 days that might as well be eternity. Good luck with it, he said, turning back to the horses. Caleb. He stopped but didn't turn. I meant what I said, about choosing to live. It's not too late. It's never too late. He heard her walk away, her boots scuffing in the dirt. Heard someone greet her, the local preacher probably, or the town mayor. Heard her voice fade as she was led away to her new life. And Caleb stood there with the horses and the dust and the crushing weight of 5 years of grief finally, truly hitting him all at once. She was right. He'd been choosing death, slow, comfortable death. Hiding from life because life had hurt him too badly. But hiding didn't honor Sarah and Emma. It didn't make their loss mean something. It just made him a ghost, already dead but too stubborn to lie down. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on not feeling pain that he'd stopped feeling anything at all. And Eliza, in 3 days, had shown him what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away, what he could still have if he was brave enough to reach for it. But was he? Caleb finished with the horses, signed the manifest, and collected his pay. The station master asked when he'd head back. Caleb said morning. The lie came easily, because he wasn't leaving in the morning. Wasn't leaving at all, not yet. Not until he figured out if the man who died 5 years ago could learn to live again. Night fell on Cedar Ridge. Caleb found a room at the boarding house, lay on a narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd have to face a question he'd been running from for 5 years. Who was Caleb Vance when he wasn't just surviving? He had no idea. But for the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he wanted to find out. And that wanting, that tiny spark of hope in the darkness, felt like the first breath after drowning, like coming back to life. Morning light found Caleb sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching Cedar Ridge wake up. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Eliza stepping out of that coach, pistol steady, facing down death without flinching. Saw her dark eyes looking at him like she could see straight through the armor to whatever remained underneath. The town stirred slowly. A shopkeeper swept his boardwalk. 2 women carried water from the well. Somewhere a rooster crowed, late and confused. Cedar Ridge wasn't much, rough buildings, dirt streets, the kind of place that existed because someone had found silver nearby and everyone else had followed hoping to catch the overflow. Hard place. Hard people. The kind of town Caleb usually passed through without a second thought, but Eliza was here now, and that changed everything. "You still here?" The station master, a balding man named Guthrie, stepped onto the porch. "Thought you'd be halfway to Denver by now." "Delayed." Caleb didn't look at him. "Horse go lame?" "Something like that." Guthrie studied him with the shrewd eyes of a man who'd seen every kind of traveler the frontier produced. "Or maybe you're thinking of staying a spell." "Maybe." "Wouldn't have anything to do with that school teacher, would it? The one you brought in yesterday?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." "Fair enough." Guthrie pulled out a pipe, tamped tobacco into it with practiced fingers. "But if you're planning to linger, might want to know what you're getting into. This town's got troubles." Despite himself, Caleb's attention sharpened. "What kind of troubles?" "The kind that comes when a place grows too fast. Silver brought people. People brought problems. We got claim jumpers, thieves, a saloon owner who thinks he runs things, and not enough law to keep it all from exploding." He lit the pipe, puffed thoughtfully. "Town council's been trying to hire a marshal for 6 months. Nobody wants the job. Pays bad, and the life expectancy's worse." "What's that got to do with me?" "Nothing, maybe. Or maybe everything." Guthrie fixed him with a knowing look. "You got a reputation, Caleb. Word gets around. Man who's survived 5 years driving the worst routes in the territory. Man who's faster with a gun than most and steadier under pressure than any. Town could use someone like that." "I'm not a lawman." "Didn't say you were. Just saying if you're staying, people might look to you, whether you want them to or not." Caleb stood abruptly. "I'm not staying, just delayed, like I said." He walked away before Guthrie could respond, but the man's words followed him. Troubles, problems, a town on the edge of chaos, and Eliza walking into the middle of it, probably thinking her Boston manners and Eastern education would be enough. It wouldn't be. Out here, nothing was ever enough. He found himself walking toward the east end of town without consciously deciding to. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Cedar Ridge, a small wooden building that had seen better days. The roof sagged, paint peeled from the boards. Windows bore cracks poorly repaired with oilcloth. It looked one strong wind away from collapse, and Eliza stood in front of it, hands on her hips, staring up at the building with an expression caught between dismay and determination. "It's worse than I thought," she said, without turning. Somehow she'd known he was there. Caleb stopped a few feet behind her. "You could leave, go back to Boston." "No, I couldn't." She turned to face him, and her eyes held that same steady resolve. "I made a commitment. I signed a contract. 20 children in this town need a teacher, and I intend to be that teacher." "In that building? It's not safe." "Then I'll make it safe." She gestured at the sagging roof. "I've already spoken with the council. They've promised repairs." "Promises are cheap." "True, but they're a start." She walked closer, close enough that he could see the circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept much either. "Why are you still here, Caleb? I thought you'd be gone by now." He didn't have a good answer. Couldn't articulate in the tangled mess of thoughts and feelings that had kept him rooted in place. Delayed, he said finally. Liar. But she said it gently, without accusation. You're running from something, or toward something, I'm not sure which. Maybe both. She smiled that small, knowing smile. That's the most honest thing you've said to me. They stood in the morning light, and Caleb felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. He could leave. Should leave. Get back on the Denver road and forget about dark-eyed school teachers and towns with troubles. Go back to the numbness, the safety of not caring. Or he could stay. Risk caring again. Risk feeling again. Risk everything he'd buried when Sarah and Emma died. The roof needs more than promises, he heard himself say. Needs actual work. New shingles at minimum, probably new support beams too. Eliza's expression shifted, hope kindling in her eyes. Do you know how to do that kind of work? Used to, before I drove coaches. Before fire took everything. Might be I remember enough. The town council has a small budget for repairs. I don't want their money. The words came out harsher than intended. Just point me to the lumber and tools. Caleb, don't. He held up a hand. Don't make this more than it is. You need help. I've got time to kill. That's all. Another lie, and they both knew it, but Eliza let it stand. The hardware store is on Main Street, she said. Tell Mr. Carson I sent you. He'll have what you need. Caleb nodded and started to walk away. Caleb. He stopped, didn't turn. Thank you. 2 words. Simple. Sincere. They hit him harder than any bullet. He spent the morning at the hardware store, selecting lumber and shingles, borrowing tools. Carson, a shrewd businessman with friendly eyes, asked no questions beyond the necessary ones about measurements and materials. But his knowing look suggested he'd heard about the school teacher and the stage driver, and had drawn his own conclusions. By noon, Caleb had a wagon loaded with supplies and was back at the schoolhouse. Eliza had recruited 3 local boys to help, scruffy kids with eager faces and dirt-streaked clothes. They swarmed the wagon like locusts, grabbing boards and chattering excitedly. Careful, Caleb barked. You drop that lumber, you'll take off a foot. The boys froze, wide-eyed. Do what he says, Eliza instructed firmly. Mr. Vance knows what he's doing. Mr. Vance again. The formality felt strange, a barrier between them after 3 days of shared danger. But maybe barriers were good. Maybe they kept things from getting complicated. The work proved harder than Caleb expected. 5 years of holding coach reins had kept his arms strong, but his carpentry skills had rusted. His first cuts were sloppy, his measurements off. Frustration built like steam in a kettle. You're forcing it. Eliza appeared at his elbow, startling him. She'd changed into a simple work dress and tied her hair back with a faded ribbon. The saw, I mean. Let the blade do the work. You know carpentry now, too? My father was a furniture maker before he became a merchant. I spent my childhood in his workshop. She took the saw from his hands, demonstrated the proper technique. Smooth strokes. Let the teeth bite naturally. She was right. The cut came easier, cleaner. Caleb watched her work for a moment, noting the confidence in her movements, the way her hands knew exactly what to do. You're full of surprises, he said. Most people are, if you bother to look past first impressions. She handed back the saw. Try it now. He did. Better this time. The board came clean with minimal waste. They worked through the afternoon, Caleb on the roof with the boys hauling supplies, Eliza handling ground-level repairs and organization. The schoolhouse slowly transformed from decrepit to merely worn. Not perfect, but functional. Safe. As the sun began its descent, Caleb hammered the last shingle into place and climbed down, muscles aching in a way that felt good. Honest work. Building instead of just surviving. It stirred something in him he'd thought was dead. It looks wonderful. Eliza stood back, surveying their work. Pride colored her voice. The children will be so pleased. It's just a roof. It's more than that. It's shelter, safety, a place where they can learn without worrying the ceiling will cave in. She turned to him, and in the golden light her face seemed softer, younger. You did a good thing today, Caleb. I hammered some nails. Don't make it noble. Why do you do that? The question came sharp and sudden. Why do you diminish everything good you do? Why can't you just accept that you helped? because accepting meant caring, and caring meant risk, and risk meant possible loss, and loss meant pain he'd barely survived once and couldn't survive again. "I should go," he said, instead of answering. "Getting late." "Will you come back tomorrow? There's still work. The windows need proper glazing, and the floor has weak spots that need reinforcing." Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to cut this clean before it got messy, before he started to care too much. "I'll think about it," he said. He walked back to the boarding house as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, his mind churning. This was dangerous. More dangerous than Apache or bandits or any physical threat, because Eliza was getting past his defenses without even trying, just by being herself, competent, courageous, seeing him as more than the ghost he'd become. That night, Cedar Ridge showed him its troubles firsthand. Caleb had gone to the saloon, the Silver Dollar, predictably named, for a drink and some distance from his own thoughts. The place was crowded, miners and drifters and hard men spending hard-earned money on whiskey and cards. He found a corner table and nursed a glass of rot gut, content to watch and be ignored. Then she walked in. Not Eliza. Another woman, young, maybe 19, with badly dyed red hair and a dress cut too low for decency. One of the saloon girls, clearly, but something in her face caught his attention. Fear, poorly hidden behind rouge and forced smiles. A man grabbed her wrist as she passed. Big fellow, drunk, mean-eyed. "Where you been, Maggie? I paid for your time. I told you, Mr. Garrett, I don't work that way. I serve drinks, that's all." "Liar." He yanked her close, hard enough to make her stumble. "Every girl here works. Don't think you're special." Caleb's hand tightened on his glass. Not his business, not his problem. Just a saloon dispute. Happened every night in every frontier town. But the girl, Maggie, looked terrified. And Garrett looked violent. "Let her go!" The words came out before Caleb could stop them. The saloon quieted. Every eye turned to him. Garrett's face flushed an ugly red. "You talking to me, stranger?" "I said let her go. She told you no. That's the end of it." Garrett released Maggie, who stumbled back and stood. He was big, easily 6'3" and solid muscle. His hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. "You don't know who you're messing with. I'm foreman at the Silvertop mine. I run things in this town." Then act like it. Man in charge doesn't need to force girls half his size. Dangerous words. Caleb knew it even as he said them. Knew he was picking a fight he didn't need, standing up for a girl he didn't know, in a town he was supposed to be leaving. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. Eliza had cracked something open inside him, and now all this blocked feeling was pouring out at the worst possible moment. Garrett's hand moved. Caleb's moved faster. His gun cleared leather and leveled at Garrett's chest before the bigger man's fingers touched metal. The saloon held its breath. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said quietly. "You're going to apologize to the lady. Then you're going to finish your drink and leave. And you're going to remember that no means no, regardless of who you are. And if I don't, then I put a bullet in you and we let the town decide whether it was justified." Caleb's voice stayed level, calm. "Your choice." Long silence. Garrett's eyes calculated, measuring odds and pride against survival. Finally, grudgingly, he muttered something that might have been an apology, threw money on the bar, and stormed out. The saloon exhaled. Conversation resumed, though more subdued. Caleb holstered his gun and returned to his table, trying to ignore the tremor in his hands. It had been 3 years since he'd drawn on a man. He'd hoped never to do it again. "Thank you." Maggie appeared at his table, eyes wide. "He's been bothering me for weeks. Nobody else would stand up to him." "Somebody should have." "They're all scared. He really does run things around here. He and Mr. Blackwood, the saloon owner." She glanced around nervously. "You should probably leave town. Garrett doesn't forget." "So I've been told." Caleb finished his whiskey, the burn doing nothing to settle his nerves. "I'll keep it in mind." But he didn't leave. Couldn't seem to make himself walk back to the boarding house and pack. Instead, he sat there, nursing another drink, thinking about Eliza and her courage in the face of danger. Thinking about how she'd challenged him to live instead of just survive. Maybe standing up for Maggie was part of that. Part of remembering what it meant to care about something beyond his own survival. Or maybe he was just a fool looking for trouble. The night deepened. Caleb finally left the saloon and walked through dark streets toward the boarding house. Cedar Ridge at night was a different creature. Shadows and whispers, and the occasional shout from a back alley. Lawless, dangerous. The kind of place that chewed up the weak and spit them out. And Eliza was here, alone, thinking her education and good intentions would be enough. He found himself walking toward the schoolhouse instead of the boarding house. Just to check on it, he told himself. Make sure their work hadn't been vandalized. That was all. The building looked peaceful in the moonlight, freshly repaired roof casting clean shadows. No signs of trouble. Caleb started to turn away when he noticed light in the window. Faint, flickering. Candlelight. Someone was inside. His hand went to his gun. He approached quietly, years of frontier survival making his footsteps silent, peered through the window. Eliza sat at a makeshift desk, writing by candlelight. Paper spread around her, lesson plans, probably, or letters. She looked absorbed, completely focused on her work, completely vulnerable. Caleb's chest tightened. She had no idea how exposed she was. No idea that men like Garrett prowled these streets. No idea that her courage and competence wouldn't protect her from the simple, brutal violence the frontier could deliver. He should knock, warn her, tell her to go back to wherever she was staying and lock her door. Instead, he watched, just for a moment. Watched her write, completely absorbed in creating something good in a place that usually destroyed good things. Watched her believe in a future worth building. And something in him shifted, not healed, he was too damaged for that, but changed. Like a bone that had set wrong being broken again so it could heal properly. Painful. Necessary. I know you're there, Caleb. He jerked back, startled. She hadn't looked up, hadn't given any sign of awareness, but she knew. How? You breathe like someone who's been running, even when you're standing still. Now she looked up, meeting his gaze through the window. Come in. It's not locked. He hesitated. This felt like a threshold. Like once he stepped through that door, there'd be no going back to the numbness and isolation he'd wrapped around himself for protection. He opened the door anyway. The schoolroom smelled of fresh wood and old paper. Eliza had already started organizing it. Desks in neat rows, chalkboard cleaned, books stacked carefully on shelves she must have brought herself. Creating order from chaos. Building something worthwhile. Couldn't sleep? She asked, still writing. Could ask you the same thing. Too much to do. School starts Monday and I'm nowhere near ready. She set down her pen, finally giving him full attention. What brings you here at this hour? Caleb leaned against the doorframe, suddenly unsure. Making sure the repairs held, that's all. Liar. Again that gentle certainty. You're worried about me. Should be worried about yourself. You know what kind of town this is? I have some idea. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at dark streets. I'm not naive, despite what you seem to think. I know there are rough men here, dangerous men, but there are also families, children who deserve an education, people trying to build something better. People trying to build usually get trampled by people trying to take. Maybe, but that doesn't mean we stop building. She turned back to him. Earlier tonight, I heard about what you did at the saloon, standing up for that girl. Word traveled fast in small towns. Caleb grimaced. It was stupid, made unnecessary enemies. It was brave and necessary. Someone had to show that man his behavior has consequences. Brave gets you killed out here. So does cowardice, just more slowly. She moved closer, and Caleb fought the urge to step back. You're not the man you pretend to be, Caleb Vance. You act like you don't care, but you do. You act like you're dead inside, but you're not. You're just hurt and scared and convinced that caring will get you destroyed again. The words hit too close to truth. Caleb's defenses slammed up. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you lost someone important, and I know you've been punishing yourself ever since by refusing to live. Stop. His voice came out rough, strained. Just stop. Why? Because I'm right? Because you can't stand someone seeing the truth? Because it's none of your business. The shout surprised them both. Caleb rarely raised his voice. You've known me 3 days. You don't get to psychoanalyze me, don't get to dig into things you don't understand. Then help me understand. She didn't back down, didn't flinch from his anger. Tell me what happened. Tell me why a good man has convinced himself he's worthless. I'm not. He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Because he had convinced himself exactly that. Had spent 5 years believing Sarah and Emma's deaths were his fault. That he should have been home. Should have protected them. That his failure to do so made him unworthy of anything good. The silence stretched. Eliza waited, patient and implacable. Fire, Caleb said finally, quietly. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter, they burned. I'm sorry. Don't be. Wasn't your fault. He turned toward the door. I should go. Was it yours? The question stopped him cold. What? The fire. Was it your fault? I wasn't there. I should have been there. That's not the same thing as causing it. She moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. Caleb, tragic things happen, terrible things. We can't always prevent them, no matter how much we wish we could. That doesn't make them our fault. I made enemies. Freight work. Crossed the wrong people. They came for me and found my family instead. You don't know that. I know. The words came out broken. I know because 3 days after the funeral, one of the men I'd crossed made a comment about how accidents happen when you don't pay what you owe. I put 2 and 2 together. Did you confront him? I killed him, said flatly, without pride or shame. Found him in an alley, put a bullet in his brain, then I disappeared before the law could ask questions. Eliza absorbed this without visible reaction. Did it help? What? Killing him. Did it bring them back? Did it ease the pain? No. The admission cost him. It just made me one more killer in a territory full of them. Then maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself. Maybe it's time to accept that you're human, that you failed to prevent something terrible, and that you deserve to keep living anyway. Caleb laughed, bitter and harsh. You make it sound simple. It's not simple at all. It's the hardest thing in the world. She reached out, touched his arm lightly. The contact burned. But it's possible. I know because I've done it. Lost my parents. Blamed myself for not saving them. Spent 2 years convinced I should have died with them. Then I realized something. They wouldn't have wanted that. They'd have wanted me to live, to honor them by living fully, not by dying slowly. Her hand on his arm felt like fire and ice at once. Caleb wanted to pull away, wanted to lean into it, wanted contradictory things that made no sense. What if I can't? The question came out barely a whisper. What if I'm too broken? Then you learn to live broken, scars and all, perfectly imperfect. She smiled sadly. We're all damaged, Caleb. Every single person in this town, in this territory. The frontier doesn't attract the whole and happy. It attracts the broken and desperate, people running from something or toward something. But broken doesn't mean worthless. It just means human. Caleb looked at her, really looked, saw past the courage and competence to the pain underneath. She'd meant what she said. She understood because she'd lived it. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Don't know how to care without drowning in fear of losing again. No one does. We just do it anyway. One day at a time, one choice at a time. She released his arm, stepped back. Stay in Cedar Ridge, not for me, for yourself. Stop running, face the fear, choose to live. And if I can't, then you can't. But at least you'll have tried. And trying counts for something. She returned to her desk, picked up her pen, went back to writing as if she hadn't just turned his entire worldview inside out, dismissing him, giving him space to process. Caleb stood there, heart hammering, mind reeling. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run back to Denver in the numbing safety of endless routes and nameless passengers, to protect himself from the terrifying vulnerability of caring again. But he didn't move. Couldn't, because something had shifted in that conversation. Some fundamental pillar of his carefully constructed isolation had crumbled. I'll come back tomorrow, he heard himself say. Finish the repairs. Eliza didn't look up, but he saw her small smile. The windows need glazing. I'll handle it. He walked out into the night, leaving her to her work. The walk back to the boarding house felt longer than it should have. Caleb's thoughts churned, years of certainty dissolving into uncertainty. Could he do this? Could he actually stay? Face his fears and try to build something instead of just surviving? He didn't know, but for the first time in 5 years, he wanted to find out. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work and slowly crumbling defenses. Caleb spent his mornings at the schoolhouse, making repairs, reinforcing weak spots, glazing windows. Eliza worked alongside him, organizing supplies, preparing lessons, transforming the space into something worthy of the children it would serve. They talked while they worked. Small conversations at first, weather, tools, techniques, then deeper. Eliza told him about Boston, about her father's furniture workshop, about teaching at a girls' school before heading west. Caleb found himself sharing too. Bits and pieces of his life before the fire. Childhood in Missouri. Learning to shoot from his father. Meeting Sarah at a church social when he was 20 and she was 18. Talking about them hurt. But it also felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing. The town noticed. Caleb couldn't miss the looks, the whispers, the knowing smiles from shopkeepers and townspeople, the stage driver and the school teacher. They were creating a story whether he wanted one or not. On Saturday evening, 2 days before school started, they finished the last repairs. The schoolhouse looked transformed, clean, safe, ready. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, slowly turning, taking it all in. "It's perfect," she breathed. "Absolutely perfect. It's functional, not the same thing. To me it is." She turned to him, eyes bright. "Thank you, Caleb. I couldn't have done this without you. You'd have found a way. You always do." They stood in the fading light, and Caleb felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. 3 days of working side by side. 3 days of slowly peeling back layers. 3 days of remembering what it felt like to connect with another human being. "Caleb?" she started. The door crashed open. Garrett filled the doorway, drunk and furious. Behind him, 3 other men, miners by their clothes, thugs by their bearing. "Well, well," Garrett slurred, "the hero and his schoolmarm, Cozy." Caleb stepped in front of Eliza automatically. "Leave, now." "Don't think so. See, you embarrassed me the other night, made me look weak in front of the whole saloon. Can't have that." He stepped inside, his friends following. "Time to settle accounts." "There's nothing to settle. You were bothering a woman. I stopped you. That's the end of it." "That's where you're wrong, stranger." Garrett cracked his knuckles. "Around here I say when things are over." Caleb's hand drifted toward his gun. 4 against 1. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse. "Touch that pistol and we'll kill you both," one of the other men growled, revealing his own weapon. "This is just going to be a friendly lesson about respecting your betters." Caleb calculated rapidly. If he drew, someone would die. Probably him. Definitely Eliza, caught in the crossfire. If he didn't draw, they'd beat him, probably badly. But Eliza might survive. Easy choice, really. He raised his hand slowly, stepping further in front of Eliza. "Fine. Your lesson. But she's not part of this. Let her leave." "Caleb, no," Eliza started. "Let her leave." Garrett considered, then shrugged. "Fine, don't need witnesses anyway. Get out, schoolmarm, and keep your mouth shut unless you want trouble too." "I'm not leaving him." "Eliza," Caleb said quietly, urgently. "Go. Please." Their eyes met. He saw her wrestling with the decision, saw her courage warring with pragmatism. Finally, reluctantly, she moved toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. "If you kill him, you'll answer for it. I promise you that." Then she was gone, and Caleb was alone with 4 men who wanted to hurt him. "Smart girl," Garrett said. "Now then, let's teach you about respect." The first punch caught Caleb in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. He stayed on his feet barely. The second hit his jaw, snapping his head sideways. He tasted blood. Don't fight back, he told himself. Let them have their fun. As long as Eliza was safe, nothing else mattered. But his body had other ideas. 5 years of frontier survival had honed instincts that didn't care about rational thought. When Garrett swung again, Caleb ducked, drove his shoulder into the bigger man's gut, sent him staggering back. "Fight back, will you?" Garrett grinned savagely. "Good. More fun that way." They came at him together. Caleb fought with desperate efficiency, landing blows where he could, protecting his head, trying to stay upright. He took down one man with a lucky punch to the throat, sent another stumbling with a kick to the knee, but 4 against 1 was always going to end one way. They wore him down, ground him into exhaustion. Finally, a punch to his temple sent him to his knees. He tried to rise, couldn't. The world spun. "Enough," he heard Garrett say through the ringing in his ears. "He's learned his lesson." Footsteps retreating, door slamming, then silence. Caleb knelt on the schoolhouse floor, bleeding and beaten, and found himself almost smiling. Because he'd protected her. Because his first thought hadn't been survival, but keeping Eliza safe. Because after 5 years of not caring, he'd just taken a beating for someone who mattered. That had to mean something. That had to mean he was still alive after all. The door burst open again, and Caleb's hand instinctively moved toward his gun before pain lanced through his ribs, reminding him why that was a bad idea. But it wasn't Garrett returning for another round. It was Eliza, carrying a basin of water and clean cloth, her face pale but set with determination. "I told you to leave," Caleb managed through split lips, "and I ignored you." She knelt beside him, dipping the cloth into water. "Can you stand?" "Give me a minute." "You don't have a minute. Garrett's friends are drinking at the saloon, bragging about what they did. It's only a matter of time before someone comes to finish the job or arrest you for starting trouble." She pressed the cloth to his bleeding temple. "Can you walk?" Caleb tested his legs, pushed himself upright with a groan. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken. He'd been lucky. Or Garrett had shown mercy, hard to tell which. "Where?" he asked. "My room. The boarding house won't take you looking like this, and the doctor will ask questions we can't answer." She ducked under his arm, taking his weight. "Come on." They moved through dark streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare where lamplight and voices spilled from the saloon. Eliza guided him with surprising strength for someone her size, half carrying, half dragging him through shadows and alleys. Once they had to duck into a doorway when 2 miners stumbled past, drunk and laughing. Caleb held his breath, felt Eliza pressed against him, her heart racing against his chest. When the miners passed, she pulled him forward again without comment. Her room turned out to be a small space above the general store, accessed by an external staircase. Simple furniture, a narrow bed, her trunk still half unpacked. Books everywhere, stacked on the floor, piled on the small table, lined up on makeshift shelves. A schoolteacher's room, Eliza's room. She lowered him onto the only chair, then lit a lamp and set about cleaning his wounds with businesslike efficiency. Her hands were gentle, but her expression remained stern. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, dabbing blood from his cheek. "You can't just punch your way through problems out here." "Didn't punch, they did." "You know what I mean." She wrung out the cloth, the water turning pink. "Garrett runs half this town. His uncle owns the mine. You've made an enemy who can make your life impossible." "My life was already impossible." Caleb winced as she touched a particularly tender spot. "At least now I've got a reason for it being impossible." "This isn't funny. Wasn't joking." She paused, met his eyes. Hers were dark with worry and something else, something that made his breath catch despite the pain. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Why did you let them beat you instead of fighting back? You had your gun. You could have gotten us both killed." He caught her wrist gently, stopping her ministrations. "They were drunk, angry, armed. If I'd drawn, someone would have fired. Maybe me, maybe you. Wasn't worth the risk." "So you just took it?" "I've taken worse." "That's not the point." Her voice cracked slightly. "You could have died, Caleb. For what? For stopping someone from bothering a saloon girl? For fixing a schoolhouse? For—" She stopped, looked away. "For you," Caleb finished. "I did it for you. All of it." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to address. Eliza pulled her wrist free, returned to cleaning his wounds with renewed focus. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He watched her work, noting the tremor in her hands she was trying to hide. "Know you're brave enough to face down armed men, smart enough to talk your way out of trouble, stubborn enough to drag a bleeding man through town in the middle of the night. Stupidity, not stubbornness. Same thing, usually." That earned him a small, reluctant smile. She finished with his face, moved to checking his ribs. Her fingers probed carefully, professionally, but Caleb felt each touch like a brand. Nothing broken, she announced, though you'll be bruised for weeks. Can you lift your shirt? He did slowly, pain flaring in his side. Eliza sucked in a breath at what she saw. Caleb didn't need to look to know it was bad. He could feel the swelling, the deep ache that meant serious bruising. I should get the doctor. No doctors. Word would spread. Caleb, I said no. He caught her hand again, held it. I'll heal. Always do. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. At least let me wrap the ribs. Support will help with the pain. She found cloth in her trunk, began binding his torso with practiced efficiency. Her closeness made breathing difficult for reasons that had nothing to do with his injuries. She smelled of soap and ink and something floral he couldn't identify. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in dark waves around her face. Where did you learn to do this? He asked, needing to break the tension. My mother. She volunteered at a hospital in Boston, taught me basic care. She tied off the bandage. There, that should hold. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're staying here tonight. That boarding house is the first place Garrett will look if he decides to finish what he started. Caleb glanced at the single narrow bed, then back at Eliza. I can't. You can and will. I'll take the chair. You need rest more than I do. Eliza, your reputation will survive one night of nursing an injured man. Her tone brooked no argument. Besides, half the town already thinks we're courting. Might as well give them something to talk about. Are we? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Courting. She met his gaze directly, and he saw vulnerability there beneath the strength. I don't know. Are we? Caleb wanted to say no. Wanted to maintain the fiction that this was just delayed departure, just killing time, just two people thrown together by circumstance. But he was tired of lying, tired of hiding. I want to be, he said quietly. But I don't know if I can. Don't know if I'm capable of it anymore. Because of your wife? Because I loved her, and it destroyed me when I lost her. Because I swore I'd never let myself care that much again. He looked down at his battered hands. Because caring means risk, and I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. Eliza pulled the other chair close, sat facing him. Can I tell you something? About why I really came west? He nodded. I was engaged. In Boston. To a good man, respectable family, everything my parents would have wanted. She twisted a loose thread on her dress. But I didn't love him. I liked him, respected him. But love? No. I was settling, accepting comfortable safety instead of risking real feeling. What happened? I called it off 3 weeks before the wedding, caused a scandal, naturally. His family was furious, mine was disappointed. The school where I taught suggested I find employment elsewhere. She smiled sadly. So I came here, to Cedar Ridge, to start over somewhere nobody knew me or my mistakes. Doesn't sound like a mistake to me. Sounds like honesty. Maybe, but it was terrifying, walking away from security, from everything I knew, because I wanted something more than just comfortable numbness. She reached out, touched his face gently. I see that same fear in you, that same choice. Between safety and feeling, between surviving and living. Caleb leaned into her touch despite himself. What if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice, only the one you can live with. Her thumb traced his cheekbone carefully, avoiding the bruises. I won't pressure you, Caleb, won't demand anything you can't give, but I need you to know I see you, the real you, underneath all that armor, and I'm not afraid of what I see. You should be. I'm damaged, Eliza. Broken. So am I. We all are. She pulled her hand back, stood. Get some rest. We'll figure out what comes next in the morning. She moved to the window, looking out at dark streets. Caleb watched her, this woman who'd walked into his life a week ago and turned everything upside down. This woman who saw through his walls and didn't run. This woman who made him want to try being human again. Eliza? Yes? I'm glad you came west. Glad you ended up in Cedar Ridge. Glad you got on my coach that day. She turned, smiled that small, genuine smile that did dangerous things to his heart. So am I. Caleb woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, he forgot where he was, forgot about the beating, forgot everything except the unexpected peace of morning. Then he tried to move, and pain reminded him forcefully of the previous night's events. Easy. Eliza appeared with a cup of coffee, helped him sit up. How do you feel? Like I got kicked by a horse. Several horses from the look of it. She handed him the cup. Drink. I need to go to the schoolhouse. It's Sunday, and I want to prepare for tomorrow, but I'll be back in a few hours. I should go. You should rest. She fixed him with that stern schoolteacher look. Don't make me argue with you. You'll lose. Despite the pain, Caleb smiled. Yes, ma'am. She gathered her things, papers, books, a worn satchel, and headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused. Caleb? Stay in Cedar Ridge, please. Not because of me, though I hope that's part of it, but because you deserve more than just endless miles and nameless passengers. You deserve a home. Then she was gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his battered body and a decision he still didn't know how to make. He spent the day in her room, resting, thinking, watching the town move past the window below. Cedar Ridge on a Sunday was surprisingly peaceful. Families walking to church, kids playing in the streets, shopkeepers taking a rare day of rest. Normal life. The kind he'd stopped believing existed. Around noon, footsteps on the stairs made him tense. Too heavy for Eliza. He reached for his gun, which Eliza had thoughtfully retrieved from the schoolhouse, and waited. The knock was tentative. Mr. Vance, it's Tom Hickory from the way station. Caleb relaxed slightly. What do you want? Just to talk. Can I come in? Against his better judgment, Caleb opened the door. Tom stood there looking uncomfortable, hat in hands. Heard about last night, Tom said without preamble. Heard Garrett and his boys worked you over good. Word travels fast. Always does. Tom stepped inside uninvited, looked around the sparse room. Also heard you're staying in Cedar Ridge, that true? Thinking about it? Good. Town needs men like you. Caleb laughed bitterly. Men who get beaten in schoolhouses? Men who stand up to bullies. Men who aren't afraid of Garrett or his uncle's money. Tom met his gaze seriously. Men who might be interested in a job. I have a job, stage driver. Had a job. I got a telegraph this morning. Company's reassigning your route. They heard about the trouble, figured you weren't coming back. Tom pulled a paper from his pocket. But there's another job available, if you want it. Marshal of Cedar Ridge. Caleb stared at him. You're joking. Dead serious. Town council's been trying to hire someone for months. Pay's not great, $50 a month plus room and board. But it comes with authority. Real authority to clean up this town. I'm not a lawman. You're a man who knows how to handle trouble. That's close enough. Tom set the paper on the table. Think about it. Town council meets Tuesday evening. They'd like an answer by then. He left before Caleb could refuse outright. Caleb picked up the paper, scanned the formal language of the job offer. Marshal. Him. The idea was absurd. And yet, what was he going back to Denver for? More endless routes? More nameless passengers? More running from a past that would follow him anywhere? Here, at least, he'd have a reason to stay. A purpose. And Eliza. Always back to Eliza. When she returned that afternoon, she found him sitting at the table, staring at the job offer. She read it over his shoulder without asking permission. Are you going to take it? She asked. I don't know. It's crazy. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone else they've asked, and you actually care about this town whether you want to admit it or not. She sat across from him. What's really stopping you? Fear, he admitted. Fear that I'll fail. That people will die because I'm not good enough. That I'll lose someone else He stopped, couldn't finish. Someone else you care about, Eliza completed. Someone like me. Yes. She reached across the table, took his hand. I can't promise I won't die, Caleb. None of us can. The frontier is dangerous for everyone, but I can promise that living in fear of loss is worse than loss itself, because at least loss comes from having had something worth losing. Did you read that in a book? I lived it. After my parents died, and I'm still here, still living, still trying to build something good. She squeezed his hand. Take the job. Be the marshal. Help make this town safer. Not just for me, but for all of us. And if I fail, then you fail trying, which is better than succeeding at running away. She had an answer for everything. It was infuriating and endearing in equal measure. I need to think about it, he said finally. Then think. You have until Tuesday. She stood, moved toward the small stove. Now, let me make us some dinner. You need to eat more than coffee. They spent the evening in companionable silence, eating the simple meals she prepared, reading her lesson plans. Him a newspaper someone had left behind. Domestic. Peaceful. Everything Caleb had convinced himself he didn't deserve. As darkness fell, Eliza insisted he stay another night. His protests about her reputation were waved away with practical arguments about his injuries and Garrett's likely whereabouts. So Caleb spent a second night in her narrow bed while she dozed in the chair and tried to remember the last time he'd felt this strange combination of pain and contentment. Monday morning brought reality crashing back. Eliza had to start teaching, and Caleb had to decide what to do with himself. He was healing, but still moving stiffly, bruises blooming spectacular shades of purple and yellow across his ribs and face. You should see the doctor, Eliza said for the 10th time as she prepared for school. I'm fine. You're stubborn. Same thing. She smiled despite herself, then sobered. What will you do today? Walk, think. Maybe talk to some people about this marshal job. Good. She gathered her materials, checked her appearance in the small mirror. First day jitters, Caleb realized. She was nervous. You'll be wonderful, he said. She turned, surprised. What? The teaching. You'll be wonderful at it. Those kids are lucky to have you. Her expression softened. Thank you. That means more than you know. She left, and Caleb forced himself upright despite his body's protests. He needed to move, needed to clear his head, needed to figure out if he was actually considering this insane marshal proposal or just delaying the inevitable return to Denver. He made his way carefully down the stairs and into the morning streets. Cedar Ridge was waking up, people heading to work, shopkeepers opening their doors. Several stared at his battered face. A few nodded in what might have been respect or sympathy. Word had definitely spread about Saturday night. Caleb found himself walking toward the schoolhouse, not to interrupt Eliza's first day, just to… what? Make sure it was safe? Check on her? He was being ridiculous and he knew it, but he kept walking anyway. The schoolhouse looked cheerful in the morning light, children gathering outside in small groups. 20 or so, ranging from maybe 6 to 14, all dressed in their Sunday best for the first day. They eyed Caleb warily as he approached, probably warned by their parents about strangers. Then the door opened and Eliza appeared and the children's faces lit up. She welcomed each one by name. She'd obviously done her homework, learned who they were, and ushered them inside with gentle efficiency. Just before entering herself, she caught sight of Caleb standing at a distance. She didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him openly, but her small smile said everything. He turned away, satisfied she was safe, and found Tom Hickory watching him from across the street. You got it bad, Tom observed, walking over. Don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Tom pulled out his pipe. Come on, let me buy you breakfast. We should talk about that marshal position. They ended up at the only restaurant in town, a small establishment run by a Chinese couple who served surprisingly good food. Tom ordered for both of them, then fixed Caleb with a serious look. Let me tell you about Cedar Ridge, Tom said. 3 years ago, this was nothing. 20 people maybe, scratching out a living. Then someone found silver up in the hills. Within 6 months, we had 300 people. Within a year, we had all the problems that come with sudden growth. Let me guess. Claim jumping, theft, violence. All that and more. The mine owners brought in their own security, thugs really, to protect their interests. Saloon owner Blackwood brought in gamblers and working girls. And nobody's thinking about the families, the decent people trying to build actual lives here. Why not hire proper law before now? We tried. First marshal lasted 3 weeks before Garrett's boys ran him out. Second one took money from Blackwood and looked the other way while everything fell apart. Third one? Tom paused. Third one tried to arrest Garrett's uncle for claim jumping. They found him in an alley with a bullet in his back. Caleb absorbed this. And you think I'd do better? I think you're mean enough and stubborn enough to survive. And I think you care about this town, even if you won't admit it. So Tom leaned forward. That school teacher? She's trying to bring civilization here, education, culture, hope for these kids. But she can't do it alone. Needs someone to make sure the civilized folks have a fighting chance against the ones who'd rather keep things wild. That's a lot of pressure to put on one man. It is. But you're not just any man. You're Caleb Vance. Man who survived 5 years of the worst routes in the territory. Man who stood up to Garrett when nobody else would. Man who's already proven he's willing to bleed for what's right. Or just willing to bleed, Caleb muttered. Their food arrived, and they ate in silence for a while. Caleb's mind churned through possibilities and consequences. If he took the job, he'd have to stay in Cedar Ridge, face his fear of attachment daily, risk caring about people who might die despite his best efforts. But he'd also have purpose, direction, a reason to get up in the morning beyond just surviving another day. The council meets tomorrow night, Tom reminded him. 7 o'clock at the assayer's office. You should come. At least hear what they have to say. I'll think about it. Good enough. Tom signaled for more coffee. Now, while we're being honest, let me ask you something. You planning to court that school teacher properly, or just hover around her like a kicked dog hoping for scraps? Caleb nearly choked on his food. That's direct. Frontier doesn't reward subtlety. So which is it? I don't know. I barely know her. Knew my wife 3 days before I proposed. Been married 42 years come August. Tom grinned. When you know, you know. It's not that simple. It never is. But it's also never as complicated as we make it. Tom stood, dropped coins on the table. Think about the marshal job. Think about the girl. Hell, think about whether you want to keep running or finally stop and build something. But think fast. Life doesn't wait for men who can't make decisions. He left Caleb alone with his breakfast and his thoughts. Outside, Cedar Ridge continued its daily routine, oblivious to one man's internal struggle. Caleb watched people pass by the window. Miners heading to the silver fields, shopkeepers arranging displays, a mother walking with 2 small children. Normal life. The kind that happened when people stopped running and started building. Could he do that? Could he stop running? The day passed slowly. Caleb walked the town, getting a feel for its layout and its people. He noted the good, families, hardworking folks, the small church that held services on Sundays, and the bad, the saloon that started serving before noon, the gambling den behind the assayer's office, the rough men who watched him with hostile eyes as he passed. Cedar Ridge needed help. Tom was right about that. The question was whether Caleb was the man to provide it. As afternoon shadows lengthened, he found himself back at the schoolhouse. Classes had ended, children dispersed to their homes, but light still showed in the windows. Eliza, probably grading or planning tomorrow's lessons. He knocked. "It's open," she called. Inside, she sat at her desk, surrounded by papers, looking tired but satisfied. "How did it go?" Caleb asked. "Wonderfully, terrifyingly, both at once." She smiled. "I have students ranging from first readers to advanced mathematics. It's going to be challenging, but I think we can make it work." She set down her pen. "How was your day?" "Confusing." He pulled up a small chair meant for children, sat carefully. "Tom Hickory cornered me, pushed the marshal job pretty hard." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." "And have you?" "That's all I've done today." He rubbed his face, winced when he touched a bruise. "Eliza, I don't know if I can do this, any of this. The job, the town, us." She came around the desk, crouched in front of him so they were eye level. "Then let me make it simpler. I'm staying in Cedar Ridge. I signed a 1-year contract, and I intend to honor it. Probably longer if things go well. So the question isn't whether we'll be in the same place. We will be, at least for the next year. The question is whether you want to be here as the stage driver passing through once a week, or as someone who's actually part of this community." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. You're the one making it complicated." She took his hands. "I'm not asking you to marry me, Caleb. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm asking if you want to stay, want to try, want to see what might happen if you stop running." "I'm afraid," he admitted. "I know, so am I." She squeezed his hands. "But I'm more afraid of spending my life wondering what if than I am of risking pain." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked. Caleb felt something shift inside him, some final wall crumbling, some last defense giving way. "I'll go to the council meeting tomorrow," he said quietly. "Hear what they have to say. And? And we'll see what happens after that." It wasn't a commitment, wasn't a promise, but it was a step. And from the way Eliza smiled, it was enough. Tuesday evening arrived too quickly. Caleb spent the day in a state of nervous energy he hadn't felt in years, alternating between certainty that he'd refuse the marshal job and equally strong certainty that he'd accept it. By the time 7 o'clock approached, he still didn't know what he'd say. The assayer's office doubled as the town hall for council meetings. 5 men waited inside. The assayer himself, the owner of the general store, a prosperous-looking rancher, Tom Hickory, and surprisingly, the town doctor. "Mr. Vance," the assayer greeted him. "Thank you for coming. I'm Henry Walsh, council chairman. This is Arthur Chen, who runs the general store, Samuel Reed, who owns the Box R Ranch, you already know Tom, and this is Dr. Morrison." Handshakes all around. They gestured for Caleb to sit. "We'll get right to it," Walsh said. "Cedar Ridge needs a marshal, desperately. We've tried to hire 3 times in the past year. All 3 failed for various reasons. We need someone tough enough to stand up to the rougher elements, honest enough not to be bought, and smart enough to know when to fight and when to talk." "Tom seems to think that's me," Caleb said. "I'm not convinced." "Tell us why not," Dr. Morrison suggested. "Maybe we can address your concerns." Caleb considered his words carefully. "I'm not a lawman. I've driven stages, hauled freight, done odd jobs. I can shoot straight, and I don't back down from fights, but that doesn't make me qualified to keep the peace in a town this size." "What would make you qualified?" Reed asked. "Honest answer? I don't know. Training, maybe. Experience. Something more than just being stubborn." "Stubborn's a start," Walsh said, "and you've got something our previous candidates lacked. You actually care. You stood up to Garrett, protected that saloon girl, helped our new school teacher get her building safe. You didn't do any of that for money or glory. You did it because it was right. And got myself beaten half to death for my troubles. But you survived," Tom pointed out, "and more importantly, you didn't leave. You're still here. That tells me you're committed in a way our other candidates never were." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. They were making him sound noble when all he'd done was follow instinct and maybe try to impress a woman. "What would the job actually entail?" he asked. "Keep the peace," Walsh said simply. "Break up fights, investigate crimes, arrest those who break the law. We've got a small jail, 2 cells, and you'd have authority to deputize citizens if you need help. Salary's $50 a month, plus you get the marshal's house rent-free. It's not much, but it's yours as long as you wear the badge." $50 was less than he made driving stages, but the house was a significant benefit, and the job would keep him in one place, keep him near Eliza. "What about Garrett and his uncle?" Caleb asked. "They obviously run things around here. How would you expect me to handle them?" The council members exchanged glances. Dr. Morrison spoke up. "Carefully. James Garrett, that's our friend from the other night. He's the nephew of Marcus Garrett, who owns the Silvertop mine. Marcus essentially controls the town's economy. Most men here work for him directly or indirectly. He's not someone you cross lightly, but he's also not above the law," Walsh added firmly. "We want a marshal who can stand up to him when necessary, who won't be intimidated or bought off. And if standing up to him gets me killed, then we'll find another marshal and try again," Walsh said bluntly. "But we're hoping it won't come to that. We're hoping a strong lawman's presence will be enough to curb the worst excesses without things escalating to violence." "You're hoping," Caleb repeated, "not guaranteeing." "There are no guarantees on the frontier," Reed said. "You know that better than most." "True enough." Caleb sat silent for a moment, weighing everything. Then Eliza's words came back to him. "Failing while trying is better than succeeding at running away." "I'll do it," he heard himself say. "On one condition." "Name it," Walsh said eagerly. "I run things my way. You give me authority, you let me use it. Don't second-guess every decision. Don't undermine me when things get tough. I'll consult with you when I can, but in the moment, I need to know you'll back my judgment." The council members looked at each other, then Walsh nodded. "Agreed. You're the marshal. We'll support you." "Then I accept." They produced a badge, tarnished silver, star-shaped, the word Marshal engraved across it. Walsh pinned it to Caleb's shirt with ceremonial gravity. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, Marshal Vance," he said. Caleb looked down at the badge, feeling its weight. Physical weight, sure, but also the weight of responsibility, of commitment, of choosing to stop running and start building. He was terrified, and for the first time in 5 years, he was exactly where he wanted to be. The Marshal's house sat at the edge of town, a small wooden structure that had seen better days but was still standing. Caleb moved in the next morning with nothing but his saddlebags and weapons, the sum total of 5 years spent never settling anywhere. The emptiness of the place reflected the emptiness he'd carried inside him for so long, but now that hollow feeling was starting to fill with something he couldn't quite name. Purpose, maybe, or hope, or terror disguised as both. He spent his first official day as Marshal walking every street in Cedar Ridge, making his presence known. The badge on his chest drew mixed reactions. Some folks nodded approval, others looked away nervously, and a few, mostly the rough men who worked for Marcus Garrett or frequented Blackwood's saloon, watched him with open hostility. By noon, word had spread. The stage driver had taken the Marshal job. By evening, everyone knew about his connection to the schoolteacher. Small towns had no secrets, and Cedar Ridge was smaller than most. Caleb was checking the jail, 2 cells, both empty, both in need of cleaning, when footsteps announced a visitor. He turned to find a man in his 50s, well-dressed by frontier standards, with cold gray eyes and the kind of smile that never reached them. "Marshal Vance," the man said smoothly. "I'm Marcus Garrett. I own the Silvertop mine. Thought we should meet." Caleb straightened, measuring the man. Marcus Garrett looked nothing like his nephew James. Where James was rough and brutal, Marcus was refined and calculated. More dangerous in Caleb's estimation because his threats would come wrapped in politeness. "Mr. Garrett," Caleb didn't extend his hand. "What can I do for you?" "I heard about the unfortunate incident between you and my nephew. I want to apologize on his behalf. James can be overzealous when he drinks. Overzealous is one word for it. He'll be disciplined, I assure you." Marcus's smile stayed fixed. "I run a respectable operation here, Marshal. I don't condone lawlessness, even from family." "Good to hear." "However," Marcus continued, his tone sharpening slightly, "I do expect the law to be applied fairly. My men work hard in difficult conditions. Sometimes they blow off steam in ways that might seem rough to outsiders. I'd hate for overzealous law enforcement to create unnecessary tensions." There it was, the real reason for the visit. Marcus was establishing boundaries, making clear that his men were off limits. "The law applies to everyone," Caleb said quietly. "Rich and poor, mine owner and miner, your nephew and the saloon girls he bothers. Everyone." Marcus's smile finally faded. "I'm offering you a chance to be reasonable, Marshal. This town runs on silver, my silver. Interfere with that, and you'll find yourself very unpopular very quickly. Already unpopular. Got beaten in a schoolhouse to prove it. And yet here you stand wearing a badge, thinking you can make a difference." Marcus moved closer, voice dropping. "Let me tell you how this works. 3 marshals before you tried to enforce the law without understanding the reality of Cedar Ridge. 2 ran, 1 died. You strike me as smarter than that." "Smart enough to know a threat when I hear one." "Not a threat, a fact." Marcus adjusted his coat. "I have no quarrel with you, Marshal. Stay out of my business, keep the worst troublemakers in line, and we'll get along fine. Try to be a hero, and you'll learn what happened to the last man who wore that badge." He left without waiting for a response. Caleb stood alone in the jail, the weight of the badge suddenly feeling heavier. Marcus Garrett had just drawn the battle lines. The question was whether Caleb had the courage to cross them. That evening, he found himself at the schoolhouse again. It was becoming a habit, this gravitating toward Eliza. She was grading papers by lamplight, her face tired but content. "How was your first day as Marshal?" she asked without looking up. "Met the real power in town. He threatened me politely." Now she looked up, concern flickering across her face. "Marcus Garrett? You know him?" "He came by yesterday, introduced himself, welcomed me to town, offered to fund new textbooks for the school." She set down her pen. "He was perfectly charming and absolutely terrifying." "That about sums him up." Caleb sat on one of the student desks, felt it creak under his weight. He made it clear he expects me to look the other way when his men cause trouble. What did you tell him? That the law applies to everyone. Eliza smiled, but worry shadowed her eyes. That was brave and possibly very stupid. Story of my life lately. He picked at a splinter in the desk. I keep thinking about what you said, about choosing to live instead of just survive, about trying being better than running. Having second thoughts? Constantly. But I'm still here. She stood, moved closer. Close enough that he could smell the chalk dust on her dress, see the tiny lines of fatigue around her eyes. I'm glad. This town needs you. I need... She stopped, looked away. Need what? Someone who understands. Someone who knows what it's like to carry weight and keep moving anyway. She met his gaze again. I'm not as brave as you think, Caleb. I'm terrified half the time. Terrified the children won't learn. Terrified I made a mistake coming here. Terrified that trying to build something good in a place this hard is just setting myself up for failure. You're the bravest person I know. Then you need to meet more people. But she smiled as she said it. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two broken people pretending to be whole while we try to fix a broken town. Maybe that's exactly what makes us right for the job. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Caleb wanted to reach for her, pull her close, tell her everything he was feeling. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by 5 years of practiced emotional numbness. Eliza stepped back first, returning to her desk. You should go. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder than today. She was right, though Caleb didn't know yet how right she was. The trouble started 3 days later. Caleb was making his evening rounds when he heard shouting from the saloon. Not unusual, the silver dollar was always loud, but this sounded different, angrier, more desperate. He pushed through the doors to find a crowd gathered around 2 men circling each other. One was a miner Caleb didn't recognize. The other was James Garrett, drunk and spoiling for a fight. You calling me a cheat? James slurred, swaying slightly. I'm saying that hand came from your sleeve, not the deck. The miner was younger, maybe 20, and foolishly brave. Saw it with my own eyes. Then your eyes are lying. My eyes are fine. Your hands are dirty. James lunged. The miner sidestepped, landed a solid punch to James's jaw. The bigger man stumbled back, then charged with a roar. They crashed into a table, scattering chips and cards and drinks. Enough! Caleb pushed through the crowd, grabbed James by the collar, and hauled him backward with strength born of adrenaline and anger. Both of you stop! Stay out of this, Marshal, James snarled. This is between me and him. Not anymore. Caleb kept his grip firm. You're drunk, he's angry, and nobody's dying over a card game tonight. He cheated. Then we'll sort it out when you're sober. Caleb looked at the miner. You, go home, sleep it off. But go, now, or I arrest you both for disturbing the peace. The miner hesitated, then nodded and left. Smart kid. James, however, wrenched free from Caleb's grip. You got no right. I've got every right. I'm the law. Caleb kept his voice level despite his racing heart. Go sleep it off, James. Don't make this worse than it already is. For a moment, James looked ready to swing. The saloon held its breath. Then Blackwood, the owner, appeared at James's elbow. Come on, mister. Garrett, Blackwood said smoothly. Let me buy you a drink upstairs. Private room. Much better than brawling with some nobody. James allowed himself to be led away, but his parting look at Caleb promised retribution. The crowd dispersed, disappointed by the lack of bloodshed. Caleb stood alone in the middle of the saloon, aware that he'd just made an enemy of James Garrett for the second time. This was going to end badly. He knew it with the certainty that came from years of reading situations and surviving impossible odds. But he couldn't back down now. The badge on his chest demanded better. He left the saloon and found Tom Hickory waiting outside, pipe in hand. Well handled, Tom said. Was it? I just humiliated James in front of half the town. You stopped a fight that would have ended with someone dead or badly hurt. That's your job. Tom puffed thoughtfully. But you're right that there'll be consequences. James won't forget this. Neither will his uncle, I'm guessing. Probably not. Tom studied him. You having second thoughts about the badge? Every day. But I'm learning to live with second thoughts. Good, because this town needs you to stay the course. Needs someone who'll stand up to the Garretts, even knowing what it might cost. After Tom left, Caleb walked slowly back toward his house, but found himself detouring to the schoolhouse. It was late, past 9, but light still showed in the windows. Eliza's dedication to her students was impressive and slightly worrying. The woman needed to sleep. He knocked softly. "It's me." She opened the door, and one look at his face told her something had happened. "Come in, tell me." He did, explaining the incident at the saloon while she listened with growing concern. "You did the right thing," she said when he finished. "Doing the right thing seems to involve making enemies." "Usually does." She poured him coffee from a pot she kept warm on the small stove. "But making enemies while standing for something is better than making friends by standing for nothing." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" She gestured at the schoolroom. "I could have stayed in Boston, could have married Robert and lived a comfortable, meaningless life. But I'd have hated myself. At least here, even if I fail, I'll fail trying to do something worthwhile." Caleb sipped the bitter coffee, thinking. "Your fiancé, Robert. Do you ever regret leaving him?" "Not for a moment. I regret hurting him. He didn't deserve that. But I don't regret choosing honesty over comfort." She sat across from him. "Do you regret taking the badge?" "Ask me in a month. If I'm still alive." "That's not funny. Wasn't joking." He set down the cup. 3 marshals before me. 2 ran, 1 died. Marcus Garrett made sure I knew that. And now I've publicly challenged his nephew twice. The odds aren't in my favor. Then maybe it's time to change the odds." She leaned forward, eyes bright with an idea. "You can't face them alone. You need deputies, men you can trust. Build a force that can stand against the Garretts." "With what?" "Town can barely afford 1 salary, let alone several." "Then find volunteers. Men who are tired of living under the Garretts' thumb. Men with families who want their children to grow up in a town ruled by law, not fear." Her enthusiasm was building. "They exist, Caleb. I see them every day. Fathers who bring their children to school, who want better for them. They'd help if someone asked. Or they'd be too scared. Maybe. But you won't know unless you try." She had a point. Caleb had been thinking of this job as a solo venture, him against the town's problems. But Eliza was right. He needed allies. Needed to build something bigger than one man with a badge. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good." She smiled. "Now go home and rest. You look exhausted." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Eliza, thank you for believing I can do this even when I don't believe it myself." "Someone has to." She walked him to the door. "Besides, I have faith in you." "Why?" "Because you keep showing up. Keep trying. Keep choosing to care even when it would be easier not to." She touched his arm briefly. "That's what courage looks like, Caleb. Not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it." He left before he could do something foolish like kiss her or confess feelings he wasn't sure he understood. The walk home gave him time to think about her words, about deputies, about building something instead of just surviving. Maybe she was right. Maybe he didn't have to face this alone. The next morning, Caleb started recruiting. He approached men carefully, feeling them out, looking for those who might be tired of the status quo. The first few conversations went nowhere. People were too scared, too dependent on the mine, too convinced that fighting the Garretts was suicide. Then he met Daniel Chen, Arthur Chen's son. 25, strong and angry. "My father won't stand up to them," Daniel said bitterly when Caleb approached him at the general store. "Says it's bad for business. But I'm tired of watching Garrett's men come in here, break things, and walk out without paying. Tired of seeing my father humiliated in his own store. If you wore a deputy's badge, you could do something about it." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I need men I can trust, men willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous." "My father would kill me." "Your father might surprise you. Deep down, I think he wants someone to fight back. He's just too practical to do it himself." Caleb met the younger man's gaze. "I'm not going to lie to you, Daniel. This is dangerous. Might get you hurt or worse, but it's also a chance to make this town into something better." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'm in. When do I start? One deputy. It was a start. Over the next week, Caleb found two more. Robert Hayes, a widower whose wife had died in a mine accident caused by Garrett's negligence, and young Thomas Riley, barely 20, who'd watched Garrett's men beat his father for complaining about unpaid wages. 3 deputies. Not an army, but better than alone. Caleb swore them in at the jail, pinning on their badges with the same ceremony Walsh had used for him. They looked scared and determined in equal measure. Here's how this works, Caleb told them. We enforce the law fairly, rich or poor, connected or not. Someone breaks the law, we arrest them. Someone causes trouble, we stop them, and we watch each other's backs. What about the Garretts? Hayes asked. What about them? They break the law, same rules apply. Caleb met each man's eyes in turn. I won't lie. They'll come after us. They'll use their money and influence to make our lives difficult. But we don't back down. We stand firm. Together. And if they try to kill us, Thomas asked nervously, then we defend ourselves, legally and proportionally. Caleb smiled grimly. But let's try to avoid it coming to that. Word spread fast. By evening, everyone knew the marshal had deputized 3 men. The reaction was mixed. Some townspeople seemed relieved, others worried it would provoke the Garretts, and Marcus Garrett himself sent a message requesting a meeting. They met at the restaurant, neutral ground. Marcus arrived with his nephew James, who still bore bruises from their last encounter. Caleb came alone, a calculated risk. Marshal, Marcus greeted him coldly, I hear you've been building a little army. 3 deputies. Hardly an army. 3 men wearing badges and carrying guns in my town. Our town, Caleb corrected. Cedar Ridge doesn't belong to any one person. Marcus's expression hardened. I think you misunderstand the situation here. I employ 60% of the working men in this town. I fund the roads, the water system, half the buildings. Without me, Cedar Ridge doesn't exist. Then you should want law and order. Keeps your investment safe. I have law and order. My security force handles problems at the mine and in the camps. I don't need government interference. Your security force handles your problems, Caleb said. I handle everyone else's. Like when your nephew here beats people half to death or cheats at cards. James started to rise, but Marcus waved him down. You're making accusations you can't prove. I'm making observations based on what I've seen, and I'm making it clear that badge or no badge, title or no title, everyone follows the same laws. Caleb leaned forward. You want to do business in Cedar Ridge? Fine. Do honest business. But the days of your men doing whatever they want without consequences are over. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, but I'm also stubborn, and I've got 3 deputies now who are just as stubborn as I am. Marcus studied him for a long moment. I could have you removed. 1 word to the council. Try it. See how that works out. Caleb stood. We're done here. You know where I stand. What you do with that information is your choice. He walked out before Marcus could respond, heart pounding but head high. It was a declaration of war, essentially. But wars fought with law instead of bullets might just be winnable. The next 2 weeks proved him half right. Caleb and his deputies arrested a dozen men for various offenses. Drunk and disorderly, theft, assault. Half of them worked for Garrett. Each arrest brought pressure from Marcus, threats, bribes, political maneuvering. But Caleb held firm, and slowly the town started to change. Families felt safer. Shopkeepers stood up to troublemakers. The saloon fights decreased, small improvements, but real. And through it all, Eliza was there. Not interfering, not demanding his time, but present. They developed a routine. Most evenings after she finished at the school, they'd have coffee together at the restaurant or walk the quiet streets, talking about their days, their fears, their hopes. Caleb found himself looking forward to those evenings more than anything else. Found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day. Found himself caring in ways that terrified and exhilarated him. One evening, 3 weeks into his tenure as marshal, they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. It's working, Eliza said softly. What you're doing, I can see the difference already. Small difference, Well, differences start small. She looked at him. You're doing what you set out to do, making the town safer, giving people hope. That's not small, Caleb. Couldn't do it without you. You could, but I'm glad you don't have to. He turned to face her fully. Eliza, I need to tell you something. All right. When I got on that coach back in Denver, I was dead. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. I'd been dead for 5 years, just going through the motions, waiting for the frontier to finish what the fire started. He took her hand, felt her fingers wrap around his. Then you got on my coach. And you looked at me like I was human, like I was worth something, and you made me want to try being alive again. Caleb, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Don't know if I can be the man you deserve, but I'm willing to try, willing to risk carrying again, willing to stop running and start building. He squeezed her hand. If you'll have me. Eliza's eyes shone with unshed tears. I was beginning to think you'd never ask. Is that a yes? That's a definite yes. She laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Though we should probably court properly. Give the town something to talk about besides arrests and corruption. I can court properly, probably, maybe. He smiled. I'm a bit rusty. We'll figure it out together. She leaned her head on his shoulder, just like we've figured out everything else. They sat there as darkness fell, watching stars emerge one by one. Caleb felt something in his chest that he thought was dead forever. Peace. Hope. The beginning of happiness. But the frontier never let happiness last long. The attack came 2 days later, fast and brutal. Caleb was making his morning rounds when he heard screaming from the direction of the schoolhouse. He ran, deputies falling in behind him, and arrived to find smoke pouring from the building. Fire. The word hit him like a bullet. Not again. Please, not again. Eliza! He charged toward the door, but Hayes grabbed him. It's empty. School doesn't start for another hour. Relief nearly buckled his knees, then anger took over. This was a message, a warning. Hurt what the marshal cares about. They put out the fire. It had been set deliberately, contained mostly to one corner. Damage was bad, but not catastrophic. The building could be repaired. But the message was clear. Caleb stood in the damaged schoolroom, rage and fear warring inside him. Someone had tried to burn down Eliza's school, had tried to destroy what she was building, had targeted her to get to him. Marshal, Daniel called from outside. Found something. Caleb walked out to find Daniel holding a piece of paper, words scrawled in crude letters. Last warning, leave or burn. Garrett, Hayes growled. We don't know that, Caleb said, though he suspected the same thing. Who else would it be? Good question, but proving it was another matter. Eliza arrived minutes later, breathless from running. She stared at her damaged school, face white with shock. Who did this? She whispered. Don't know yet, but I'll find out. Caleb showed her the note. You should leave town, go back to Denver, somewhere safe. No. Eliza, no. Her voice grew stronger. I won't let them win. Won't let fear drive me away from the work I came here to do. She looked at him with fierce determination. You're staying and fighting, so am I. This is different. They're targeting you to get to me. Then we both stay. Both fight. Together. She took his hand. I meant what I said before. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from us. Caleb wanted to argue, to insist she leave for her own safety, but he knew that look in her eyes. Knew that once Eliza Hart made up her mind, nothing would change it. Then we end this, he said quietly. Find whoever did this and make sure they answer for it. It took 3 days of investigation, questioning, and careful watching. But finally, Thomas spotted one of James Garrett's closest friends buying lamp oil and matches, far more than any reasonable person would need. When confronted, the man broke quickly, admitted he'd been paid to set the fire. Paid by James Garrett. Caleb arrested James at the mine office, in front of Marcus and a dozen witnesses. James Garrett, you're under arrest for arson and attempted destruction of property. You can't prove anything, James snarled. I've got a witness who says otherwise. He's in a cell right now, ready to testify. Caleb pulled out handcuffs. You can come quietly, or we can make this harder. Your choice. Marcus stood. Marshal, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Your nephew paid someone to burn down the schoolhouse. That's a crime. He's going to jail. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Marcus's voice was ice. Who you're challenging? I'm doing my job, enforcing the law. Caleb met his gaze steadily. You want to stop me? You'll have to go through me and 3 deputies and every citizen in this town who's tired of the Garretts thinking they're above the law. The moment hung in perfect balance. Then James made his choice. He went for his gun. Caleb was faster. His weapon cleared leather and fired before James's gun was fully drawn. The shot took James in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor. Anyone else? Caleb asked into the shocked silence, his gun now trained on Marcus. No one moved. Thought so. Daniel, get the doctor. Hayes, help me get this fool to the jail. Caleb holstered his weapon. And Marcus? If you want to try removing me from office, go ahead. But you better be sure the council will side with you over the man who just arrested your criminal nephew for arson. They carried James to the doctor, then to the jail once his wound was treated. The whole town watched. The whole town knew. The marshal had shot a Garrett, had arrested a Garrett, had challenged the most powerful man in Cedar Ridge, and lived to tell about it. That night, Caleb sat in his small house, waiting for retribution, waiting for Marcus's men to come finish what James had started. His deputies were stationed around town, ready for trouble, but the attack never came. Instead, near midnight, there was a knock on his door. Marcus Garrett stood there alone, looking older than he had that morning. Can I come in? He asked quietly. Caleb stepped aside, hand near his weapon. Marcus entered, looked around the sparse room, and sighed. I'm not here to threaten you, Marshal. I'm here to concede. Concede what? That you were right. That this town needs law more than it needs my protection. That my nephew is... He paused. Out of control. Has been for a while. I've been making excuses, protecting him, and it's cost people their safety and dignity. Caleb studied him warily. What are you saying? I'm saying do your job. Prosecute James. If he's guilty, he serves his time. No interference from me. Marcus met his eyes. And in exchange, we work together. You keep the peace, I'll make sure my people follow the law. Real partnership, not the sham I was offering before. Why now? Why the change of heart? Because I saw how the town looked at you today. With respect. With hope. Things I used to inspire before I got too focused on profit and power. He smiled sadly. And because my nephew tried to burn down a school full of children's dreams, even I can't justify that. Caleb considered. It could be a trick. Could be Marcus positioning for some future betrayal. But it could also be genuine. And if it was genuine, it could change everything. All right, he said finally. We try it your way. But James stands trial. No special treatment. Agreed. Marcus offered his hand. To a better Cedar Ridge. Caleb shook it, sealing a partnership he hoped wouldn't destroy him. Word spread quickly. The Garretts and the law had made peace. James would face trial. Order had been restored. And through it all, Caleb and Eliza had stood firm, together, choosing courage over fear. That night, Caleb walked to the schoolhouse one last time. Eliza was there, surveying the fire damage by lamplight. It'll take weeks to repair, she said. We'll manage. Town will help. They always do once you give them reason to care. She turned to him. You did it. Actually changed things. We did it. Couldn't have done it without you. I just taught children. You taught them hope. Taught their parents that building something good was worth fighting for. Taught me that being alive is better than being dead, even when being alive is terrifying. He pulled her close. Thank you for that. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. So what now? She asked. Now we rebuild. The school, the town, our lives. Together. Together, she agreed. I like the sound of that. They stood in the damaged schoolhouse, holding each other, and Caleb felt something he thought was impossible. Contentment. The deep bone-level peace that came from finally stopping the running and starting the building. He had a job, had a purpose, had a woman who loved him and a town that needed him, had a future that looked nothing like his past, had chosen, finally, to live. And for the first time in 5 years, living didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a gift. The weeks following James Garrett's arrest transformed Cedar Ridge in ways Caleb hadn't thought possible. With Marcus keeping his word and restraining his more aggressive employees, the town settled into something resembling peaceful civilization. Fights still broke out occasionally. The frontier was the frontier, after all, but they were handled quickly and fairly. The jail saw regular use, but for drunks and petty thieves rather than victims of systematic intimidation. Caleb found himself settling into a rhythm he'd never expected to experience again. Mornings began with rounds through town, checking in with shopkeepers and miners heading to work. Afternoons were spent on paperwork, training his deputies, handling disputes. Evenings belonged to Eliza. They courted properly, as she'd insisted. Dinners at the restaurant where the whole town could see them. Walks through the streets at sunset. Sitting together at town gatherings. Cedar Ridge watched their romance unfold with the kind of invested interest small towns specialized in. But for once, the gossip was warm rather than cruel. "Mrs. Patterson asked me today when we're getting married," Eliza mentioned one evening as they walked past the newly repaired schoolhouse. 6 weeks had passed since the fire, and the building looked better than it had before, rebuilt with help from volunteers across town. "What did you tell her?" Caleb asked, trying to keep his voice casual, despite his suddenly racing heart. "That you haven't asked me yet." She glanced at him with those dark, knowing eyes, which was her none too subtle way of asking when you plan to. "I've been thinking about it. Have you?" "Constantly." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "But I wanted to make sure I could actually do this. Be the man you deserve. Build a life worth sharing." "And have you decided?" "I think so, but I need to do something first." 2 days later, Caleb rode out to Denver. It was his first time back since taking the marshal job, and the city felt foreign now, too crowded and loud after weeks in Cedar Ridge. He went straight to the cemetery outside town, to 2 graves he hadn't visited in 5 years. Sarah Vance, Emma Vance. The headstones were simple, weathered by time and neglect. Caleb knelt between them, running his fingers over the carved names. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to the woman and child who couldn't hear him. "Sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I spent 5 years dying instead of living, like that somehow honored your memory." The wind rustled through the grass. A bird called in the distance. The world continued, indifferent to his pain. "I met someone," Caleb continued. "Her name's Eliza. She's a school teacher, smart, brave, stubborn as hell. She looked at me when I was nothing but a ghost and saw a man worth saving." He paused, emotions thick in his throat. "I think I love her. I think I want to marry her, but I needed to come here first. Needed to tell you that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, that loving again doesn't diminish what we had." He sat there for a long time, remembering. Sarah's laugh, Emma's tiny hand in his, Sunday mornings in their cabin, lazy and content, the life he'd had and lost. The pain of that loss had nearly destroyed him, but Eliza was right. Living in fear of loss was worse than the loss itself. "I'm going to try," he told them. "Try to build something good. Try to be happy. Try to honor you by living fully instead of dying slowly." He stood, touched each headstone once more. "Thank you for the time we had, and thank you for letting me go." The ride back to Cedar Ridge felt lighter somehow, as if he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying for too long. When he arrived late the next evening, Eliza was waiting on his porch despite the hour. "You went to Denver," she said. "Not a question." "How did you know?" "Tom mentioned you'd asked about the stage schedule, and you had that look, like someone preparing to face something difficult." She stood, moved closer. "Did you find what you needed?" "I think so." He took her hands. "I needed to say goodbye properly. To my wife and daughter. Needed to tell them I was moving forward." "And are you? Moving forward?" Instead of answering, Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It had been his mother's, the only thing of value he still owned after 5 years of drifting. "Eliza Hart, I am a broken man with a dangerous job in a rough town. I can't promise you safety or comfort or any of the things a woman deserves, but I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and a love I didn't think I was capable of feeling again." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" Eliza's eyes filled with tears. You insufferable man. You couldn't have picked somewhere more romantic, made a proper speech? Is that a no? That's a yes, you fool. Of course it's a yes. She laughed through her tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I've been waiting for you to ask since the day you first showed up at my schoolhouse pretending you didn't care. I really didn't care back then. Liar. You cared the moment I stepped onto your coach. You just weren't ready to admit it. He pulled her close, kissed her properly, and felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally click into place. Not healed, he'd always carry the scars, but whole enough, strong enough. When? He asked when they finally broke apart. Soon. I don't want to wait. She smiled, though we should probably tell people. Let them plan. Small towns love a wedding. Tomorrow, then. We'll tell everyone tomorrow. The news spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. By noon the next day, everyone knew the marshal and the school teacher were getting married. Mrs. Patterson and half the women in town descended on Eliza, offering help with everything from the dress to the flowers to the food. The men cornered Caleb, offering congratulations laced with warnings about married life delivered with knowing grins. They set the date for 3 weeks away. Enough time to prepare, but not so long that anticipation became anxiety. Caleb threw himself into making the marshal's house, their future home, actually livable. His deputies helped, along with a surprising number of volunteers. What had been a sparse bachelor dwelling slowly transformed into something that might actually be called a home. Marcus Garrett even contributed, sending over furniture from his own house. Wedding present, he said when Caleb tried to refuse, and an apology for all the trouble my nephew caused. He's serving his sentence, by the way. 6 months for arson, and he'll be under my direct supervision when he's released. Appreciate it, Caleb said, still not entirely trusting this new alliance, but willing to accept the gesture. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble arrived in the form of 3 strangers riding into town. Hard men with cold eyes and tied-down guns. They went straight to the saloon and started asking questions about the marshal. Daniel brought word to Caleb within the hour. They're asking about you, specifically about Caleb Vance. One of them seemed real interested in whether you were the same Caleb Vance who killed a man named Pike in Denver 5 years ago. Caleb's blood ran cold. Pike, the man he'd killed in revenge for Sarah and Emma's deaths. He thought that was buried in the past, forgotten in the chaos of Denver's endless violence. Apparently not. What did you tell them? Nothing. But boss, they're going to figure it out, and they look like the kind of men who've come for revenge. Caleb found the strangers at the Silver Dollar that evening, drinking whiskey and watching the door like they were expecting someone. The leader was a man in his 40s, lean and weathered, with eyes the color of winter ice. When Caleb walked in, those eyes fixed on him with recognition and hatred. Caleb Vance, the man said. It wasn't a question. That's right. You are? Name's Cole Pike. The man you murdered in Denver was my brother. The saloon went quiet. Everyone suddenly found reasons to move away from the bar, creating a wide circle of empty space. Caleb's hand drifted toward his gun, but he kept his voice level. Your brother set fire to a cabin with my wife and daughter inside. I killed him for it. That's justice, not murder. That's your story. My brother's dead and can't defend himself. Cole stood slowly, his companions flanking him. We've been looking for you for 5 years, Vance. Heard you'd disappeared into the frontier. Then we heard about a marshal in Cedar Ridge who fit your description. Thought we'd come see for ourselves. And now that you've seen me, now we settle accounts. My brother for you, fair trade. Caleb calculated rapidly. 3 against 1, all of them clearly experienced gunfighters. His deputies were scattered across town. Drawing would mean a shootout that could kill bystanders. He needed to buy time, change the odds. I don't want trouble in my town, he said carefully. You want to settle this, we do it proper, tomorrow morning, just you and me. Your friends stay out of it. Cole considered. And if I say no? If we just kill you right here? Then my deputies kill you, and everyone in this saloon testifies it was murder, and your brother's death goes unavenged because you'll hang. Caleb met his gaze steadily. Or you face me fair tomorrow, and at least one of us walks away with honor intact. Long silence. Then Cole nodded slowly. All right, tomorrow at dawn. Main Street. Just you and me. Agreed. Caleb left before they could change their minds, walking straight to Eliza's room. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. What happened? He told her everything. About Pike, about the revenge killing, about the brother who'd come for payback, about the duel set for Dawn. Eliza listened without interrupting, her face growing pale. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You could leave, she said finally. Ride out tonight. They'd never find you. I could, but then I'd be running again, and I'm done running. Even if staying gets you killed? Her voice cracked. Even if I lose you right when we're about to start our life together? I've survived worse odds. He pulled her close. And if I run now, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. This needs to end. I hate this. I hate the frontier and its stupid codes of honor and men settling things with guns. She pulled back, looked at him fiercely. But I love you, and I know you have to do this. I love you too. First time I've said it. I know. You show it every day. She touched his face gently. Come back to me. Promise me you'll come back. I promise to try. That night, Caleb barely slept. He lay in bed thinking about the morning, about Cole Pike and his cold eyes, about the very real possibility that he might die before marrying the woman who'd saved him. But more than fear, he felt a strange calm. If he died tomorrow, at least he'd die fighting for something, fighting to protect the life he'd built, the town he served, the woman he loved. That was better than dying hollow and empty, which was how he'd spent the last 5 years. Dawn came gray and cold. Caleb dressed carefully, checked his weapons, and pinned on his badge. His deputies waited outside, all 3 of them grim-faced. You don't have to do this alone, Hayes said. We can handle Pike and his friends together. No, this is my fight, my past catching up. Caleb shook each man's hand. But I appreciate the offer. If things go wrong, you 3 make sure Eliza's taken care of, and make sure this town keeps moving forward. Nothing's going wrong, Daniel said firmly. You're faster than anyone I've ever seen. You'll be fine. Caleb wished he shared that confidence. The main street was empty when he walked out, the sun just breaking over the eastern hills. Cole Pike stood at the far end, alone as promised, his hand resting on his gun. The whole town seemed to be watching from windows and doorways, witnesses to whatever came next. Caleb walked slowly down the center of the street, each step feeling heavy and light at once. This was it, the moment that would define whether he got his future or lost it. They stopped 20 paces apart, close enough to see each other clearly, far enough that both had room to draw. Last chance to walk away, Caleb said. My brother's ghost won't let me. Cole's face was hard as stone. One of us dies here today. Then let's get it done. Time seemed to stretch. The wind died. The world held its breath. Caleb's hand hovered over his gun, every muscle coiled and ready. Across from him, Cole waited with the patience of a man who'd done this before. Then Cole moved. Both guns cleared leather in the same instant. 2 shots cracked across the morning air, so close together they almost sounded like one. Caleb felt something tug at his left arm, burning pain that he ignored. His own shot took Cole high in the chest, spinning the man around and dropping him to the dirt. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Caleb walked forward slowly, gun still trained on Cole. The other man was still breathing, blood spreading across his shirt, but his weapon had fallen from his hand. Get the doctor, Caleb called, without looking away from Cole. Dr. Morrison came running, knelt beside the wounded man. He'll live. Bullet missed the heart and lungs. Lucky. Unlucky, Cole gasped. Was supposed to kill you. Killing me wouldn't bring your brother back, wouldn't fix anything. Caleb holstered his gun, pressed his hand to his own bleeding arm. But maybe living will give you time to figure out that revenge is just another way of dying. Cole's 2 friends had emerged from the saloon, hands carefully away from their weapons. Caleb faced them. Your friend needs a doctor and then a jail cell until he heals enough to leave town. You 2 can stay with him or ride out. Your choice. But if you cause trouble, you'll answer for it. They chose to stay, taking a room at the boarding house to be near Cole. Over the next week, as Cole healed and Caleb's own wound proved minor, an odd thing happened. Cole started talking to Caleb during his daily jail visits, first about his brother, then about his own life. The revenge he'd been chasing had consumed 5 years of his life, just like Caleb's grief had consumed his. I don't even know what I'll do now, Cole admitted one afternoon. Spent so long hunting you, I forgot how to live normal. I know the feeling, Caleb said quietly. Spent 5 years the same way. Then someone showed me there was another option, that I could choose to live instead of just exist. Someone like that schoolteacher you're marrying? Exactly like her. When Cole was finally well enough to ride, Caleb walked him to the edge of town. The man mounted his horse slowly, still favoring his chest. For what it's worth, Cole said, I believe you now. About my brother, about what he did. I asked around Denver before coming here, heard things that matched your story. He gathered his reins. I'm sorry for your loss, and sorry I almost made your fiancé suffer the same. You still could have killed me. But I didn't. Maybe that means something. He touched his hat in farewell. Good luck, Marshall. I hope you get the life you're building. Same to you. Try to build instead of destroy this time. Cole nodded and rode away, his friends following. Caleb watched them go, feeling like he'd closed another chapter of his past. The revenge killing that had haunted him for 5 years was finally laid to rest, not through more violence, but through understanding and choice. The wedding took place the following Sunday, just as planned. The whole town turned out, cramming into the small church until people spilled out onto the street. Eliza wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other women had spent a week making. Caleb wore his best shirt and his marshal's badge, because that badge represented who he'd become. Tom Hickory stood as his best man. One of Eliza's students, a bright-eyed girl named Lucy, served as flower girl, and the circuit preacher, who only came through Cedar Ridge once a month, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. Do you, Caleb Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live. Caleb looked at Eliza, at her dark eyes full of love and promise, and felt his heart swell with something too big for words. I do. And do you, Eliza Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live. I do, Eliza said firmly, her voice carrying across the packed church. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Caleb did, to cheers and applause from everyone present. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling so wide their faces hurt. The celebration lasted well into the night. The town had pooled resources for a proper reception, with food and music and dancing. Marcus Garrett gave a speech about new beginnings and second chances that sounded surprisingly genuine. The deputies took turns toasting their boss, and Eliza's students performed a song they'd practiced in secret, their young voices clear and sweet. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Caleb and Eliza slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand toward their home. Their home. The word still felt foreign, but wonderful. Happy? He asked as they climbed the steps to the porch. Deliriously. You? More than I thought possible. He pulled her close. Thank you. For what? For seeing past the ghost to the man underneath. For refusing to let me keep running. For showing me that loving again wasn't betraying the past, but honoring it. You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason. They stood on their porch, holding each other as the sounds of celebration drifted from the town center. Above them, stars blazed in the clear Colorado sky, cold and beautiful and eternal. What happens now? Eliza asked. Now we live. We build. We make this town into something worth being part of. He kissed her forehead. And we see where life takes us. The years that followed proved harder than either of them anticipated, but better than they dared hope. Caleb continued as marshal, building Cedar Ridge's law enforcement into something the territory took notice of. His deputies became a respected force, and the town's reputation shifted from lawless mining camp to civilized community. Eliza's school flourished. More families moved to Cedar Ridge specifically for the education she provided. She added grades, hired assistant teachers, and eventually helped establish a proper school board. The children she taught went on to become doctors, lawyers, teachers themselves, spreading out across the frontier but carrying the lessons she'd instilled. They had a daughter first, born 2 years after the wedding. They named her Sarah Emma Vance, honoring the past while building the future. A son followed 3 years later, then another daughter. The marshal's house expanded to accommodate the growing family, filled with noise and laughter and the kind of chaotic love that comes from children running wild. Marcus Garrett kept his word, becoming an ally rather than an adversary. When his nephew James was released from jail, Marcus sent him to work in a different territory, recognizing that some people needed distance to change. The mine continued to prosper, but under fair conditions that Caleb and the town council enforced. Cedar Ridge grew from a rough mining camp of 300 to a proper town of over 1,000. Churches were built, schools multiplied, roads improved, and through it all, Caleb and Eliza were there, anchors of stability in a place that had nearly torn itself apart. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the same porch where he'd proposed, watching their children play in the yard. Sarah Emma was 8 now, already showing her mother's intelligence and her father's stubborn courage. 5-year-old Thomas chased his younger sister Margaret in circles, both shrieking with laughter. "Regret it?" Caleb asked, slipping an arm around Eliza's waist. "Giving up Boston for this?" "Not for a moment." She leaned into him. "Though I do sometimes miss indoor plumbing and theaters." "We've got indoor plumbing now. One room with a pump is not the same thing." But she was smiling. "And I'd trade all the theaters in Boston for this. For you, for them, for the life we've built. It's a good life. It's an extraordinary life. We took a broken place and broken people, including ourselves, and built something beautiful." She looked up at him. "I'm proud of us." "Me too." He kissed her gently. "Though I'm especially proud of you. You're the one who had the courage to start all this, to get on that stagecoach, to face down armed men and burning buildings, and a ghost of a driver who didn't know he wanted to be saved. You wanted it. You just needed someone to show you it was possible." Their children called for them, wanting their parents to join the game. Caleb and Eliza exchanged a look, then ran down the porch steps together, chasing their laughing children around the yard as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Caleb stood in his office, a small room added 3 years ago, looking at the wall where he'd hung memories. His marshal's badge from that first day, a photograph of their wedding, one of the first taken in Cedar Ridge, drawings from his children, a certificate from the territorial governor commending Cedar Ridge's law enforcement, and in a small frame, a photograph he'd brought from Denver, Sarah and Emma, taken months before they died. He looked at it every day, remembering. The pain had dulled with time, but never disappeared. Some scars stayed forever. "Still miss them?" Eliza asked from the doorway. "Always, but not the way I used to, not with that desperate, consuming grief." He turned to face his wife. "Now it's just remembrance, honoring who they were while living the life they'd want me to have. They'd be proud of you, of the man you've become." "I hope so." He crossed to her, took her hands. "I know Sarah would have liked you. She had your same stubborn streak, your same fierce courage." "Then she had good taste," Eliza smiled. "Come to bed. Tomorrow's another day of keeping the peace and educating the youth." They walked upstairs together, checking on their sleeping children before retiring to their own room. Caleb lay in the darkness, Eliza curled against his side, and thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that burned cabin in Denver to this moment of perfect contentment, from death to life, from ghost to man. It had taken a woman stepping onto his stagecoach, had taken her looking at him and seeing worth when he saw nothing, had taken her courage in the face of danger, showing him what real strength looked like, had taken a town desperate for law and order, giving him a reason to stop running. But most of all, it had taken a choice, his choice, to stop hiding behind numbness and grief, to risk caring again, to face his fear of loss by choosing to love anyway. That choice had saved him more surely than any rescue could have. Years continued to pass. Caleb eventually stepped down as marshal at 50, his body finally protesting the years of hard work and old injuries. Daniel Chen took over the position, leading with the same integrity Caleb had modeled. Caleb became a consultant, helping train new lawmen across the territory, sharing the lessons he'd learned in Cedar Ridge. Eliza taught until 62, retiring only when her eyesight began to fail. By then, her former students were running businesses, teaching schools of their own, serving as sheriffs and mayors across Colorado. Her legacy spread far beyond one small frontier town. Their children grew and scattered. Sarah Emma became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in Wyoming. Thomas joined the territorial government, working on legislation to protect minors' rights. Margaret married a doctor and stayed in Cedar Ridge, raising her own family in the town her parents had helped build. On Caleb's 65th birthday, the town threw a celebration. Nearly 2,000 people attended, many traveling from across the territory. They honored the man who'd arrived as a broken stagecoach driver and stayed to become the foundation of Cedar Ridge's transformation. "I didn't do it alone," Caleb insisted in his speech, holding Eliza's hand. "Everything good in this town came from people choosing to build instead of destroy, choosing community over chaos, choosing law over lawlessness. I just wore the badge. You did the work." But everyone knew different. Everyone knew that Cedar Ridge's success started with one man deciding to stop running, one man choosing to care, one man proving that broken people could heal if they were brave enough to try. Caleb and Eliza lived another 20 years, growing old together in the house they'd made a home. They watched Cedar Ridge become a city, saw the railroad arrive, bringing new prosperity, saw their grandchildren grow and thrive, saw the rough frontier town transform into a civilized community that still remembered its roots. When Caleb died at 84, peacefully in his sleep with Eliza beside him, the entire city mourned. His funeral was attended by hundreds, lawmen he'd trained, citizens he'd protected, children who'd grown up in the safe town he'd helped create. They buried him in Cedar Ridge Cemetery, not far from the schoolhouse where he'd fallen in love. Eliza lived another 3 years, still sharp and fierce until the end. She spent those years writing, documenting the town's history and her own journey from Boston's socialite to frontier schoolteacher. Her memoir became a bestseller, inspiring a generation of young women to seek their own adventures. When she died at 86, they buried her beside Caleb. The headstones were simple, but the inscription told their story. Here lie Caleb and Eliza Vance. He learned to live. She taught him how. Together, they built a legacy. Their children stood at the grave. 3 generations gathered to say goodbye. Sarah Emma spoke for all of them. They came to Cedar Ridge as broken people running from their pasts. They stayed because they found each other and found purpose. They built a town, raised a family, and showed everyone around them that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to love and build despite it. She placed flowers on both graves. "Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Father, for your courage, for your love, for showing us what's possible when we refuse to give up." Years passed, decades. Cedar Ridge continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of Colorado's major cities. But it never forgot its foundation. The original marshal's office became a museum. The schoolhouse where Eliza taught became a historic landmark. And every year on the anniversary of Caleb's arrival, the city held a celebration honoring the man who'd chosen to stay. The stagecoach route Caleb once drove was eventually replaced by railroad, then highways. But travelers still passed through what had once been brutal frontier territory, now tamed and civilized. They drove past Cedar Ridge, now a thriving city of 50,000, and most never knew the story of how it began. But some did. Some stopped at the museum and read about Marshal Caleb Vance and his wife Eliza. Read about a man who'd been dead inside until a brave woman showed him how to live. Read about courage in the face of impossible odds. Read about choosing love over fear, building over destroying, living over merely surviving. And some of those visitors, carrying their own grief and fear and broken places, found hope in that story, found permission to try again, found courage to face their own fears and build their own futures. Because that was the real legacy Caleb and Eliza left behind. Not a city or laws or schools, though those mattered, but the simple, powerful truth that had saved them both. It's never too late to choose life, never too late to care, never too late to love, never too late to be brave. And in a world that often felt too hard, too cruel, too broken to fix, that truth mattered more than all the Silver Cedar Ridge's mines ever produced. It mattered because it was real. Because 2 broken people had proven it with their lives. Because on a brutal frontier route through the Colorado territories, a hardened stagecoach driver had let a sharp-eyed schoolteacher crack through his armor. And in that cracking, in that terrifying choice to feel again, they'd both found salvation. Not in safety, not in comfort, not in avoiding pain, but in facing it, and choosing to live fully despite knowing loss was possible, and building something beautiful in a harsh world, and loving fiercely even when fear screamed to run. That was their story. That was their gift. And long after they were gone, that gift lived on, in the city they'd helped build, in the lives they'd touched, in the legacy they'd left. A legacy built not on survival, but on courage. Not on avoiding pain, but on choosing joy despite it. Not on living safely, but on living fully. On choosing, always choosing, to be alive.